pause before responding. The pause before responding is one of the simplest yet most profound mental techniques you can master. In a world that glorifies speed, quick replies, and instant reactions, silence becomes a weapon of intelligence and control. When you choose to pause, even for just 2 or 3 seconds, you send an unspoken message of confidence and thoughtfulness. Instead of appearing rushed or reactive, you project an aura of calm authority, as if you hold time in your hands. This pause doesn't signal hesitation, it signals power. Neurologically, the pause allows your brain to filter impulsive reactions, giving your prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your mind, space to step in. Instead of blurting something you'll regret, you respond with precision and weight. People instantly notice this. A deliberate pause before speaking makes your words feel heavier, more considered, and more meaningful. What you say after silence often lands with far more impact than words fired out in haste. Psychologically, pausing unsettles others in subtle ways. In conversations, people are conditioned to expect immediate back and forth exchanges. Breaking this rhythm creates tension, and that tension draws their focus onto you. They lean in, waiting, valuing whatever comes next. Negotiators, leaders, and even interrogators rely on this effect. The pause turns silence into a spotlight, forcing others to hang on your words when they finally arrive. Emotionally, the pause protects you. In heated moments, it creates distance from anger and reactivity. In delicate situations, it communicates empathy and restraint. That small space between stimulus and response is where control lives, and those who master it hold an invisible advantage over everyone who rushes to fill the silence. Reframe problems as opportunities. Reframing problems as opportunities is one of the most transformative mental shifts you can make. Most people see obstacles as threats, as walls meant to stop them, and their minds instantly collapse under the weight of fear, frustration, and hopelessness. But the truth is, every problem is nothing more than raw energy, neutral at its core. It is your perspective that decides whether it destroys you or fuels your growth. When you train yourself to see problems as hidden invitations for progress, you take back the power that most people unknowingly surrender. Psychologically, this reframing taps into your brain's survival wiring. Problems trigger stress, but stress is also a signal for adaptation. Your body floods with adrenaline, your focus sharpens, and your creative instincts awaken. Instead of wasting that energy in panic, you can redirect it towards solutions. What once felt like a dead end suddenly becomes a detour that reveals an unexplored path. The obstacle itself becomes the teacher. Emotionally, this shift transforms despair into resilience. Imagine someone losing their job. Most collapse into fear, but reframed as an opportunity, it becomes a moment to reinvent, to step into a career or passion that might have been ignored for years. The pain becomes the push. The setback becomes the seed of something larger. This emotional alchemy separates the resilient from the broken. In practice, reframing makes you magnetic. Leaders, innovators, and visionaries aren't those who avoid problems, but those who face them with a lens that others lack. While the crowd drowns in negativity, you're already moving forward, seeing possibilities where others see only ruin. And that ability to shift perspective in the darkest moments is what makes people follow you. Use silence strategically. Silence, when used deliberately, is one of the most disarming and commanding tools in human interaction. While most people scramble to fill empty space with nervous chatter, the rare individual who can sit comfortably in silence radiates a quiet dominance that others can't ignore. Strategic silence flips the dynamic of any conversation, shifting the weight of anticipation onto the other person and making them reveal more than they intended. It's not passive, it's active influence disguised as restraint. Psychologically, silence unsettles people because the human brain craves rhythm and resolution. When a pause stretches beyond what feels normal, the tension rises and the instinct is to break it. This is why negotiators use silence after making an offer. More often than not, the other side will rush to fill the gap with concessions. The silence itself becomes pressure, forcing others to expose their thoughts, reveal hidden emotions, or stumble into mistakes. Emotionally, silence speaks volumes. In arguments, withholding words can wound far more deeply than shouting ever could, because it denies the other person the reaction they are craving. In intimate moments, silence amplifies presence. It creates gravity, pulling the other person into your orbit. In leadership, silence shows composure and control, proving you don't need to rush to assert yourself because your confidence speaks without words. Silence is also a mirror, reflecting back discomfort, insecurity, or honesty from whoever sits across from you. When used with precision, it becomes a scalpel, cutting through noise and posturing until only the truth remains. Most fear silence. The few who master it use it to command attention, control the tempo, and bend interactions in their favor. Ask why 3 times. The simple act of asking why 3 times is a mental trick that cuts deeper than surface-level answers and exposes the hidden truth beneath any problem, belief, or decision. Most people accept the first explanation they hear, never realizing that it is often a mask covering deeper layers of cause and meaning. But when you force yourself or others to answer why again and again, you pierce through excuses, strip away illusions, and reveal the raw core of what truly drives behavior. Psychologically, this technique dismantles the brain's tendency to stop at easy answers. The first why usually triggers a rehearsed response, the second starts to challenge comfort zones, and by the third, defenses begin to crumble. It is at that point that the subconscious leaks out, exposing hidden motives, fears, or desires that even the person answering might not have been fully aware of. This is why therapists, interrogators, and world-class innovators rely on it. It doesn't just uncover truth, it forces clarity. Emotionally, the 3 whys can feel unsettling because they peel back the layers people use to protect themselves. Someone who says, "I want to quit my job," might first explain it's about pay, then admit it's about lack of growth. But by the third why, they confess it's because they feel invisible, unvalued, or afraid of wasting their life. That final answer strikes with emotional weight, and once exposed, it cannot be ignored. Asking why 3 times is not about nagging, it's about uncovering depth in a world addicted to shallow thinking. It transforms vague complaints into solvable problems and turns hidden chaos into visible truth. Few dare to dig this deep, which is why those who do always gain the upper hand. Write down stray thoughts. Writing down stray thoughts is a deceptively powerful practice that sharpens clarity, frees mental bandwidth, and transforms fleeting ideas into tangible opportunities. The human brain is not a storage unit, it is a processor. Yet most people treat it like a cluttered attic, stuffing random reminders, half-formed ideas, and worries into its limited space. This mental hoarding creates anxiety, fog, and distraction. By simply transferring stray thoughts onto paper, you liberate your mind to focus on what actually matters, while preserving those fragments for later exploration. Neurologically, the act of writing serves as an external memory system. Thoughts that would otherwise fade or swirl chaotically become concrete, captured where they can't be lost. Your brain rewards this by releasing tension because it no longer needs to guard the information. This is why people feel lighter after journaling or note-taking. It's not the writing itself, but the sense of relief that comes from no longer carrying everything in your head. Emotionally, jotting down stray thoughts creates order from chaos. Those random late-night sparks, those nagging worries, those sudden flashes of insight, they are the whispers of your subconscious trying to break through. Ignored, they become noise. Captured, they become signals. Some of history's greatest breakthroughs began as quick, almost accidental notes scribbled on scraps of paper. That stray thought you write down today could be the seed of your future success. Writing stray thoughts also builds self-awareness. Over time, patterns emerge, recurring fears, recurring dreams, recurring ideas that beg for attention. What once felt random starts to reveal direction. Most people dismiss these mental fragments as meaningless. The smarter mind knows they are gold dust, worth catching before they disappear forever. Visualize outcomes. Visualization is the art of stepping into the future before it happens, of mentally rehearsing a reality so vividly that your mind begins to accept it as truth. When you visualize outcomes with intensity and detail, you aren't just daydreaming, you're programming your brain to create the path toward that vision. Elite athletes, performers, and leaders all use this technique because the subconscious cannot easily distinguish between a vividly imagined event and a real one. What you see with clarity, you begin to believe, and what you believe, you begin to create. Neurologically, visualization activates the same neural pathways as physical practice. This means when you picture yourself succeeding, closing the deal, delivering the speech, winning the match, your brain fires as though you're already living it. This rehearsal sharpens your reflexes, calms anxiety, and builds confidence long before the moment arrives. You've lived it in your mind, so when reality arrives, it feels familiar, almost inevitable. Emotionally, visualization is rocket fuel. It ignites desire and pulls you toward your vision with magnetic force. Instead of being trapped in fear or doubt, your emotions align with your imagined success, giving you energy to push through resistance. Seeing yourself victorious floods you with motivation, while picturing failure forces you to prepare and adapt. Both positive and negative visualization have power. One inspires, the other inoculates you against setbacks. Most people drift into the future blind, stumbling through uncertainty. But those who visualize outcomes sculpt the future in advance. They write the script their life will follow, walking into moments of pressure with the unshakable calm of someone who has already seen themselves win. Chunk information. Chunking information is the art of breaking overwhelming complexity into digestible, meaningful pieces that the mind can actually process and remember. The human brain is not built to handle endless streams of scattered data. It craves structure, patterns, and categories. When you chunk information, you turn chaos into order, making the impossible feel manageable and the forgettable unforgettable. It is the difference between drowning in detail and commanding clarity. Psychologically, chunking taps into the limits of working memory. Research shows the average person can only hold around 7 pieces of information at a time. Beyond that, the brain begins to drop, distort, or blur the rest. But by grouping bits of information into larger, coherent units, you hack this limitation. A phone number becomes 3 chunks instead of 10 random digits. A speech becomes a story instead of scattered sentences. A complex idea becomes a series of simple pillars. The mind remembers structure, not noise. Emotionally, chunking dissolves anxiety. Overwhelm is rarely about the size of a problem. It's about perceiving it as formless and infinite. By slicing it into defined segments, you shrink fear into action steps. A looming project turns into tasks. A flood of information transforms into themes. Suddenly, what once felt impossible now feels conquerable. This shift not only calms the mind, but builds momentum, because progress becomes visible in smaller wins. In influence, chunking makes you magnetic. Leaders and teachers who can compress vast complexity into 3 rules, 5 steps, or 1 guiding principle captivate audiences. They give clarity where others give confusion. People follow those who can take the overwhelming and make it simple. That power, the ability to chunk, marks the difference between sounding smart and being unforgettable. Turn tasks into games. Turning tasks into games is a psychological hack that transforms drudgery into drive. The human brain is wired for play. We crave progress, rewards, and competition far more than monotony or obligation. When you take something ordinary and layer it with rules, challenges, or points, you trick your mind into engaging with it not as a burden, but as an adventure. Suddenly, the same chores, studies, or projects that once felt heavy become thrilling opportunities to win. Neurologically, games trigger dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. Every small achievement, a checked box, a reached milestone, a finished level, floods you with a sense of victory, making you want to keep going. This creates momentum where procrastination once lived. Instead of forcing yourself to grind through tasks, you're pulled forward by the natural rush of progress. Even something as simple as timing yourself to beat the clock or keeping score against your own past performance ignites this reward system. Emotionally, gamification transforms your relationship with effort. When life feels like endless obligation, motivation dies. But when it feels like play, effort becomes joy. Imagine turning a workout into a competition with your past self, or reframing studying as a quest to collect knowledge like treasure. The tasks don't change. The meaning you attach to them does, and meaning is what sustains focus when willpower fades. This is why high performers and innovators gamify their routines. They know discipline isn't about grinding endlessly. It's about hacking the mind into wanting what's good for it. By turning tasks into games, you bypass resistance and unlock a state of flow where progress feels less like work and more like winning. Use mental anchors. Using mental anchors is the art of attaching powerful emotions, states of mind, or memories to specific triggers that you can call upon at will. Most people drift through life at the mercy of their moods, unaware that their brains are constantly forming associations between experiences and stimuli. A song can transport you back to childhood. A smell can flood you with nostalgia. A touch can unlock buried feelings. Anchoring takes this natural process and weaponizes it, allowing you to deliberately program your mind to shift into confidence, calm, focus, or motivation whenever you choose. Psychologically, anchors work because the brain doesn't separate memory from present reality. It responds to associations as if they are happening now. Athletes use this when they clench a fist to summon the rush of past victories. Public speakers recall a moment of triumph before stepping onto stage, pairing that memory with a gesture, a breath, or a word. Over time, the brain links the gesture to the emotional state so that triggering one instantly triggers the other. Emotionally, anchors can rescue you from spirals of doubt or fear. Instead of letting anxiety hijack your mind, you can reach for a pre-programmed trigger that flips the switch to confidence. Imagine walking into a high-stakes meeting and touching your watch, instantly recalling the pride and certainty of your greatest accomplishment. That memory floods your body with the same chemicals, and suddenly you radiate strength instead of hesitation. Anchors can be built from music, objects, movements, or even smells. What matters is repetition and emotional intensity. The deeper the emotion when you set the anchor, the stronger it will hold. While most are dragged around by unconscious triggers, those who master anchoring control their state like pulling a lever, commanding presence and power at will. Think in analogies. Thinking in noun analogies is the secret doorway to brilliance, a way of turning the unfamiliar into something instantly understandable. When you compare a complex idea to something simple and relatable, you create a bridge in the mind, a shortcut that makes learning faster, deeper, and unforgettable. Our brains are wired for stories and connections, not abstract concepts. An analogy transforms confusion into clarity by wrapping the unknown inside the familiar. Psychologically, Analogies hack memory. Abstract facts often slip away, but when tied to an image or story, they stick like glue. Explaining a business strategy as building the foundation before raising the walls paints a mental picture that no spreadsheet ever could. Scientists, inventors, and visionaries rely on analogical thinking to spark breakthroughs. Comparing the atom to a solar system or the brain to a computer unlock new levels of understanding that raw data alone never could. Emotionally, analogies trigger resonance. They don't just teach, they persuade. When someone hears an idea framed in terms they already know, trust forms instantly. A powerful analogy can collapse resistance and make even the most skeptical person nod in agreement because it feels like common sense. Leaders, poets, and great speakers wield analogies as weapons of influence, turning abstract visions into tangible realities their audience can feel. Most people think in straight lines, but analogical thinkers bend reality, mapping one domain onto another until sparks fly. They see hidden patterns, invisible similarities, and overlooked truths. While others drown in complexity, you can pull people to safety with a single sentence that reframes the entire picture. To think in analogies is to think like a creator, connecting dots that no one else dares to connect. Ask dumb questions. Asking dumb questions is one of the smartest mental tricks you can use because what appears simple on the surface often reveals the cracks in assumptions that everyone else blindly accepts. Most people are terrified of looking foolish, so they nod along, pretending to understand even when they don't. But the person bold enough to ask the obvious question uncovers truths that others overlook and forces hidden complexities to come to light. The dumb question is never actually dumb. It is a weapon that disarms pretense and exposes reality. Psychologically, asking dumb questions interrupts the brain's autopilot. People tend to operate inside invisible frameworks, repeating processes and beliefs without ever questioning them. When you ask, "Why do we do it this way?" or "What does that really mean?" you stop the momentum of unexamined thinking. Often, the silence that follows reveals no one actually knows. What seems like common knowledge collapses into vague assumptions the moment it's challenged. That moment of disruption is where breakthroughs are born. Emotionally, dumb questions carry a unique power. They create vulnerability, humility, and authenticity. When you dare to ask what others are too afraid to voice, you become the person everyone else secretly envies, the one who had the courage to admit confusion and demand clarity. People often feel relieved when someone else asks the very question they were too proud to ask themselves. In truth, revolutions start with dumb questions. Innovations come from them. Discoveries are sparked by them. While the world fears looking foolish, the smartest minds embrace it because they understand one thing. The question that looks stupid today is often the one that makes you brilliant tomorrow. Summarize in one sentence. The ability to summarize in one sentence is a mental razor that slices through confusion and exposes clarity. Most people drown in a flood of unnecessary words, over-explaining, circling around the point, and losing their audience along the way. But when you force yourself to distill an idea, a plan, or even a belief into a single sharp line, you reveal not only your understanding, but also your power to command attention. Brevity is intelligence crystallized. Psychologically, summarizing forces the brain to prioritize. It demands that you sift through clutter and extract the essence, sharpening both focus and comprehension. When you can express something complex in one sentence, it proves you don't just know the details, you understand the core. That clarity is magnetic because people crave leaders and thinkers who make the complicated simple. Emotionally, a single sentence carries more weight than a rambling explanation. One concise truth can hit harder than a page of justifications. Think of history's greatest speeches, mottos, or quotes. Each survives because it condenses enormous meaning into unforgettable brevity. When you can summarize with precision, your words land with authority and linger in the minds of others long after the noise fades. In practice, this trick separates those who wander from those who lead. A team lost in endless discussion looks to the person who can summarize the entire debate in one clean line. A negotiator who can condense their position in a sentence sounds unshakable. A thinker who can compress wisdom into a fragment earns instant respect. To master this skill is to master perception, because the world listens more closely when you say less. Think backwards from the result. Thinking backwards from the result is a mental trick that flips the way most people approach goals, problems, and decisions. Instead of starting at the beginning and stumbling forward with uncertainty, you begin at the end with the result already in mind and work in reverse to uncover the exact steps required. This reversal forces clarity, stripping away distractions and exposing what truly matters. When you think backwards, the fog of confusion disappears and suddenly the path reveals itself. Psychologically, this technique harnesses the brain's natural ability to simulate outcomes. Most people obsess about the obstacles in front of them, but when you place your mind at the finish line and ask, "What had to happen for me to get here?" you bypass fear and focus on structure. It transforms impossibility into inevitability because your brain begins to fill in the missing links automatically, connecting cause to effect like dominoes falling in reverse. Emotionally, thinking backwards creates certainty. A goal like "I want to be financially free" feels vague and overwhelming when viewed from the present. But when you imagine yourself already living that reality and trace backwards, what habits, what skills, what choices made it possible, the impossible suddenly feels attainable. Each backward step shrinks the gap, transforming the dream into a sequence of actions within your control. This strategy is why master strategists, entrepreneurs, and leaders often seem prophetic. They are not guessing, they are reverse engineering. While others blindly charge ahead, hoping things work out, they already know what the destination looks like and which milestones must fall along the way. Thinking backwards doesn't just change how you plan, it changes how you act, giving every step the precision of inevitability. Sleep on big decisions. Sleeping on big decisions is not a sign of hesitation. It is a demonstration of wisdom. In a world where people are pressured to act fast, to choose immediately, to answer on the spot, the ability to delay and let your subconscious mind process is a hidden superpower. When you sleep on a decision, you hand the problem over to the most powerful computer you own, your brain, while it works silently in the background, free from noise and pressure. Neurologically, sleep resets the mind. During deep rest, your brain consolidates memories, strengthens neural connections, and clears away mental clutter. This is why ideas often appear in dreams, or why clarity hits the moment you wake. Your subconscious continues to analyze patterns, weigh options, and test scenarios long after your conscious mind has shut down. By giving yourself one night, you allow solutions to rise naturally instead of forcing them under stress. Psychologically, sleeping on decisions protects you from emotional hijacking. When triggered by excitement, fear, or anger, the brain pushes for immediate action, but emotions fade with rest. That offer that felt urgent, that insult that demanded retaliation, that opportunity that seemed impossible to refuse, all look different through the lens of the morning. Time and sleep strip away illusions, leaving only what truly matters. Emotionally, the pause brings calm. It transforms overwhelming choices into manageable reflections. Instead of being a prisoner to urgency, you become the master of timing. People who sleep on decisions radiate patience, control, and depth. They rarely regret their choices because their minds were given the chance to explore every path, even the ones hidden from sight. Associate facts with images. Associating facts with images is a mental technique that transforms dry, forgettable information into vivid, unforgettable memories. The brain is not wired to easily retain abstract numbers, dates, or isolated facts, but it is a visual machine evolved to remember pictures, scenes, and stories with incredible precision. When you tie a fact to an image, you hack into this primal wiring, turning data into something the mind treats as real, alive, and impossible to ignore. Psychologically, this works because of the brain's picture superiority effect. Images are processed 60,000 times faster than words and are far more likely to be stored in long-term memory. Imagine trying to memorize a random number like 4721. Hard, isn't it? Now imagine a giant four-legged chair sitting on a 7-foot wave balanced by 2 candles while a single star, 1, glows above it. Suddenly, the number transforms into a bizarre mental movie that your brain cannot help but recall. The stranger and more exaggerated the image, the deeper it carves itself into memory. Emotionally, this technique makes learning playful, even magical. Instead of battling with repetition and frustration, you create vivid mental landscapes filled with symbols that carry meaning. A fact about history becomes a vivid picture of a king carving it into stone. A scientific principle becomes a cartoon in your head. Learning stops being a burden and becomes a creative act of imagination. The world is full of people who forget what they study the moment they close the book. The few who master associating facts with images carry knowledge with them like a secret weapon, recalling details effortlessly while others struggle. It feels like having a photographic memory, but in truth, it is simply the art of painting knowledge in the language your brain was always meant to understand. Teach someone else. Teaching someone else is one of the most powerful ways to ingrain knowledge so deeply that it becomes part of who you are. Most people believe learning ends once they've read, listened, or studied enough, but true mastery doesn't come from intake. It comes from output. When you explain an idea to another person, your brain is forced to organize scattered thoughts into structure, translate complexity into simplicity, and expose gaps you didn't even realize were there. In that moment, you stop being a passive receiver and become an active creator of knowledge. Psychologically, this process hardwires memory. The act of teaching engages multiple parts of the brain: retrieval, articulation, imagination, fusing learning into long-term storage. The protege effect proves that people who teach retain information better, understand concepts more deeply, and build unshakable confidence in their expertise. The pressure of having to explain forces clarity, and clarity is the true measure of understanding. Emotionally, teaching unlocks connection. When you guide someone else through what you know, you validate your own growth while giving another person a bridge to cross. It feels empowering to transform confusion into comprehension for someone else, and in return, their questions often spark fresh insights you wouldn't have reached alone. Teaching becomes a cycle of learning where both sides leave sharper than before. This is why the best thinkers, leaders, and innovators are also teachers at heart. They don't just hoard knowledge, they spread it, refine it, and in doing so, make it indestructible. Every time you teach, you carve understanding deeper into yourself, and with each lesson shared, you grow not only smarter, but stronger. Debate yourself. Debating yourself is one of the most underrated ways to sharpen your mind and dismantle hidden biases. Most people protect their beliefs like fragile glass, defending them against any challenge. But the smartest minds deliberately step into the role of their own opponent, attacking their assumptions, questioning their logic, and exposing cracks in their reasoning. By playing both sides, you don't just strengthen your argument, you transform it. Psychologically, self-debate forces your brain out of the comfort of confirmation bias. Left unchecked, the mind seeks evidence that proves it right, blinding you to flaws. But when you argue against yourself with the same ferocity an enemy would, your brain is forced to stretch, to confront uncomfortable truths, to build resilience. It sharpens critical thinking and eliminates sloppy reasoning. What survives this internal battle emerges stronger, leaner, and more unshakable. Emotionally, debating yourself builds humility. You realize how easily your own mind can be swayed by incomplete information, emotion, or ego. This self-confrontation stings, but it is liberating. You no longer cling desperately to being right. Instead, you crave accuracy, strength, and truth. And when you finally present your ideas to others, you've already battled every objection within yourself, which makes your confidence bulletproof. This technique is why great leaders, lawyers, and philosophers appear unstoppable. They are not surprised by counter-arguments. They've already lived them, wrestled with them, and either integrated or destroyed them. While most people crumble under the first challenge to their beliefs, you stand unshaken because you've already been your harshest critic. The battlefield in your own mind becomes the forge that makes your ideas indestructible. Use if-then planning. If-then planning is the mental blueprint that transforms vague intentions into unstoppable action. Most people fail not because they lack goals, but because their goals are soft, uncertain, unanchored, left floating in hope rather than tied to action. If-then planning locks those goals into reality by wiring them directly into your behavior. It's the difference between saying, "I'll exercise more," and declaring, "If it's 7 a.m., then I will put on my shoes and go for a run." That tiny shift makes the difference between wishing and doing. Neurologically, this method works because the brain craves patterns and triggers. By linking a specific condition, if, with a concrete action, then you build an automatic response that bypasses the endless struggle of willpower. Your prefrontal cortex, which often hesitates, debates, and procrastinates, is removed from the equation. Instead, the action becomes reflexive, almost instinctual. Psychologists call this implementation intention, and it has been proven to double or even triple the likelihood of following through. Emotionally, if-then planning reduces overwhelm. Big goals can feel impossible, but when broken into small, automatic reactions, they lose their power to intimidate. Each if becomes a trigger that nudges you forward, and each then creates momentum. Success stops being something distant and abstract. It becomes a chain of automatic wins, building confidence piece by piece. While most people are trapped in the chaos of indecision, you are calmly programming your behavior to serve your ambitions. The world notices those who act consistently, who follow through without drama or delay. If-then planning turns your mind into a machine of discipline, aligning thought and action until success feels inevitable. Practice active recall. Practicing active recall is the difference between passively drowning in information and actively engraving it into your mind like stone. Most people fool themselves into thinking they're learning when they reread notes, highlight passages, or glance through summaries. But the truth is, passive review creates only the illusion of knowledge. Active recall, on the other hand, forces the brain to retrieve information from memory, strengthening the neural pathways that lock it in place. It's the mental equivalent of lifting weights, painful at first, but it builds unshakable strength over time. Psychologically, active recall taps into the testing effect. Each time you struggle to remember something without looking, your brain treats that struggle as a signal. This information matters. Store it deeper. You're literally training your mind to pull answers from within rather than leaning on external crutches. Over time, what once felt buried becomes instantly accessible, almost automatic. This is why students who quiz themselves always outperform those who just reread notes, and why professionals who challenge themselves with recall exercises dominate in high-pressure environments. Emotionally active recall can feel frustrating. Your brain resists it, whispering that it's easier to just look at the answer. But that discomfort is the proof you're growing. Each time you force yourself to retrieve, you're carving resilience into your memory. Overcoming that resistance makes success taste sharper, more earned, and far more lasting. In a world obsessed with shortcuts, active recall is the long game. It separates those who merely consume knowledge from those who own it. While most people forget 90% of what they read within days, the one who practices active recall carries knowledge like a hidden blade, ready to draw it instantly when it matters most. Think in probabilities. Thinking in probabilities is the mental shift that separates clear-headed decision makers from those ruled by wishful thinking and blind certainty. Most people crave absolutes. They want to know something will definitely succeed or definitely fail. But life doesn't deal in guarantees. Reality unfolds in shades of likelihood, not black and white outcomes. When you start to assign probabilities instead of absolutes, you free yourself from the trap of overconfidence and panic. You begin to see the world as it truly is, uncertain but manageable. Psychologically, probability thinking quiets emotional extremes. Instead of saying, "This plan will work," you might say, "There's a 70% chance it will work, but a 30% chance it won't." That shift forces your brain to prepare for multiple outcomes, building resilience against shock when things don't go perfectly. It keeps you grounded, rational, and adaptable. You stop gambling with fate and start strategizing like a chess player, thinking several moves ahead. Emotionally, this way of thinking reduces fear and regret. If you understand from the beginning that failure was a 30% possibility, it doesn't crush you. It validates your foresight. If success arrives, you savor it with the awareness that you calculated well. Thinking in probabilities transforms outcomes from personal judgments of worth into natural results of risk and likelihood. That perspective makes you harder to break, harder to manipulate, and harder to surprise. This is why top investors, military strategists, and elite performers rely on probability thinking. They don't delude themselves with certainty. They calculate odds, prepare contingencies, and adjust dynamically. In a world where most gamble blindly, the one who thinks in probabilities moves with quiet precision and always stays one step ahead. Apply first principles. Applying first principles is the art of stripping away assumptions, traditions, and surface explanations until only the undeniable truths remain. Instead of asking, "What do others say works?" you ask, "What do I know for certain cannot be broken down further?" From there, you rebuild reality piece by piece, creating solutions not limited by convention, but shaped by truth itself. This way of thinking separates innovators from imitators, leaders from followers, and visionaries from those trapped in outdated rules. Psychologically, first principles thinking interrupts the brain's lazy reliance on analogy. Most people solve problems by comparing them to something familiar, copying strategies, borrowing shortcuts, repeating what worked before. But analogy is a cage. It blinds you to what's truly possible. By tearing down a problem to its raw elements, you liberate your mind from imitation. You begin asking questions others never thought to ask. And from those questions, groundbreaking ideas are born. Emotionally, this approach is uncomfortable because it demands you abandon the safety of "this is how it's always been done." It strips away illusions, leaving you face to face with what is real, what is unchangeable, and what can be built anew. But this discomfort is power. Every breakthrough in history, every leap in science, technology, art, and philosophy was born when someone dared to think from first principles instead of following the crowd. To apply it, you dismantle complexity into simple truths, then reconstruct solutions from the ground up. Where others see limits, you see possibility. Where others copy, you create. Those who master first principles don't just play the game, they redesign the game itself, bending reality to ideas no one else was bold enough to see. Use inversion thinking. Inversion thinking is the art of solving problems by flipping them upside down. Instead of asking, "How do I succeed?" you ask, "How do I fail?" Instead of chasing perfection, you search for the cracks, the flaws, the pitfalls that could destroy everything. It feels counterintuitive, even uncomfortable, because our minds are wired to focus on goals and desires. But when you dare to invert the question, you uncover blind spots that most people never see, and that awareness alone gives you a massive advantage. Psychologically, inversion breaks the brain's lazy tendency to stick with obvious answers. Asking, "How could this go wrong?" forces your mind into defense mode, mapping out risks, weaknesses, and threats that optimism usually blinds us to. This is why great investors like Charlie Munger obsess over avoiding stupidity instead of chasing brilliance. Success often comes not from doing more things right, but from simply avoiding the catastrophic mistakes others walk straight into. Emotionally, inversion thinking sharpens resilience. Fear of failure paralyzes most people because they never define what failure actually looks like. But when you actively imagine the worst-case scenarios, the fear shrinks. Suddenly, it's not an abstract monster. It's a list of risks you can prepare for, guard against, or eliminate entirely. Paradoxically, focusing on failure frees you from the terror of it. Inversion thinking is ruthless clarity. While others obsess over winning, you are busy removing every obstacle that makes winning impossible. You aren't blinded by hope. You're armed with foresight. And when the dust settles, it's not the dreamers who stand tall, but the ones who anticipated the fall and built their strategies around never hitting the ground. Ask, "What would break this?" Asking, "What would break this?" is the mental habit of exposing fragility before the world does it for you. Most people focus only on how to build, strengthen, or polish an idea, a plan, or a system. They fall in love with its potential, blind to its weaknesses. But the rare mind that dares to ask how it could collapse sees what others ignore, the cracks that lie beneath the surface. This question transforms you from a dreamer into a strategist, from someone who hopes things will last into someone who ensures they will. Psychologically, this question forces your brain to step outside of optimism bias, the tendency to assume things will go well simply because you want them to. By actively searching for failure points, you inoculate yourself against surprise. You begin to think like an engineer testing the stress points of a bridge or a chess player, anticipating the opponent's deadliest move. Your mind starts playing offense and defense simultaneously, making you sharper than those who only think in one direction. Emotionally, this practice is uncomfortable, even unsettling, because it forces you to confront the possibility of loss, collapse, or betrayal. It strips away the comfort of believing in permanence and forces you to face reality. Yet it is in that discomfort that resilience is born. When you already know what could break something, you are no longer paralyzed by fear. You are prepared. Those who never ask this question are blindsided. Those who do hold a quiet power, they see danger before it strikes, and they turn vulnerability into strength. The ability to ask, "What would break this?" is not cynicism, it is foresight. And foresight is what makes you untouchable. Replace "I can't" with "How can I?" The words "I can't" are a mental cage, an invisible wall you build around yourself that kills possibilities before they're even tested. The moment you say those words, your brain shuts down, creativity collapses, and you hand your power over to limitation. But when you replace "I can't" with "How can I?" everything changes. That single shift flips your brain from helplessness into problem-solving mode. Instead of surrendering to impossibility, you challenge yourself to search for a way forward, and in that search, new doors open that most people never see. Psychologically, this change rewires your focus. The human mind follows the direction of its questions. Ask defeatist questions, and you'll find excuses. Ask empowering ones, and you'll find strategies. I can't triggers the amygdala, the fear center of the brain, shutting you down. But how can I activates the prefrontal cortex, sparking creativity, logic, and innovation. Suddenly, what looked like a dead end becomes a puzzle, and puzzles are meant to be solved. Emotionally, the shift transforms weakness into resilience. Saying, I can't makes you feel small, trapped, and powerless. Saying, how can I makes you feel resourceful, defiant, and alive. It injects hope where there was despair, and hope fuels action. History is filled with people who ignored can't and instead asked how. That question led to breakthroughs, revolutions, and legacies. Every time you replace I can't with how can I, you reclaim control over your destiny. The world bends not to those who accept limits, but to those who challenge them with better questions. And that simple reframe is where transformation begins. Compare opposites. Comparing opposites is a mental trick that sharpens clarity like a blade. Instead of analyzing something in isolation, you hold it against its mirror image, the opposite extreme, and suddenly the truth stands out with piercing precision. Most people look at a choice or idea head on and get lost in its details. But when you ask, what is the opposite of this, and how does it look side by side, you unlock contrast, and contrast is where understanding lives. Psychologically, the brain thrives on comparisons. We don't understand light until we've seen darkness. We don't appreciate freedom until we've felt constraint. By deliberately framing opposites, you give your mind a ruler to measure meaning. If you're weighing a decision, comparing what happens if I act with what happens if I don't cuts through confusion. When exploring an idea, holding it against its counter idea exposes weaknesses, strengths, and hidden assumptions that would otherwise stay buried. Emotionally, opposites strike the heart. Think of gratitude. It burns brighter when contrasted with the memory of loss. Think of ambition. It feels urgent when compared to the pain of stagnation. By setting two extremes side by side, you create tension, and that tension pulls your thoughts toward clarity and your emotions toward urgency. Leaders and storytellers use this constantly, contrasting failure with triumph, despair with hope, to make their message unforgettable. Comparing opposites doesn't just illuminate choices, it forces honesty. When you can clearly see both ends of the spectrum, illusions fall away. You no longer drift in ambiguity. You know what you're walking toward, and perhaps more importantly, what you're walking away from. Those who master this trick stop living in the fog of half-truths. They see reality in high contrast. Take mental snapshots. Taking mental snapshots is the practice of freezing a moment in time inside your mind with full awareness, capturing details so vividly that they become etched into memory. Most people drift through life half-present, glancing at experiences without truly seeing them. But when you deliberately pause and lock in a mental image, the colors, the sounds, the emotions, you transform fleeting seconds into permanent anchors that can be recalled with striking clarity. Psychologically, this technique harnesses the brain's natural strength in episodic memory. Your mind does not store information like a computer. It encodes experiences through sensory detail and emotion. By consciously telling yourself, I want to remember this, and focusing on the scene as if you were photographing it with your mind, you amplify the likelihood that your brain will store it in long-term memory. A simple walk through a park can become unforgettable if you zoom in on the way sunlight cuts through leaves, the rhythm of footsteps on the path, and the scent of the air. Emotionally, mental snapshots make life richer. They slow time down in a world that races forward. The first time you meet someone who changes your life, the exact look on a loved one's face, the victory after struggle. These moments are too precious to vanish into the blur of forgetfulness. Mental snapshots allow you to return to them, not as faded memories, but as vivid living experiences. While others let their days dissolve into routine, those who practice taking snapshots build an internal gallery of meaning. Each picture held in the mind becomes proof that life is not something to rush through, but something to savor, frame, and carry forever. Notice what's missing. Noticing what's missing is a mental superpower that few ever cultivate. Most people only see what is directly in front of them, the data presented, the words spoken, the objects visible. But the sharpest minds are not defined by what they notice, but by what they realize isn't there. They ask, what's being left out? What's unsaid? What detail is conspicuously absent? This subtle shift transforms you from a passive observer into an active detective of truth, spotting blind spots and hidden agendas that slip past the majority. Psychologically, the brain is biased toward confirmation. It latches onto what is shown, assuming it tells the whole story. But reality is often revealed in the gaps. A report that avoids mentioning failures. A friend who talks about everything except what's really bothering them. A data set missing the variables that could change the entire conclusion. To notice what's missing is to pierce through illusions and see the outline of the hidden shape behind the curtain. Emotionally, this awareness sharpens intuition. You begin to sense tension not just in what people say, but in the silence between their words. You feel the weight of absences, the apology never given, the gratitude never expressed, the critical question no one dared to ask. These voids hold truth more powerful than surface appearances, and once you learn to listen for them, you are never fooled the same way again. This is why investigators, strategists, and visionaries train themselves to notice absences. While most are blinded by what's shown, they hunt for what's concealed, and in that invisible space lies leverage, insight, and control that almost no one else can see. Observe patterns in mistakes. Observing patterns in mistakes is the difference between endlessly repeating failures and transforming them into stepping stones toward mastery. Most people experience errors as isolated accidents, painful stumbles they'd rather forget. But the truth is, mistakes are rarely random. They cluster, repeat, and echo across time, leaving behind a trail of clues. When you learn to step back and connect these dots, you uncover a map of your weaknesses, habits, and blind spots. And with that awareness, you can break cycles that trap others for a lifetime. Psychologically, mistakes trigger shame, and shame drives avoidance. The brain wants to bury the memory to protect the ego, but that avoidance ensures the same errors return again and again. By forcing yourself to observe patterns, you override this instinct. You shift from self-punishment into analysis. You begin to see not just that you failed, but how you fail, rushing under pressure, ignoring details, trusting the wrong people, losing control of emotion. Suddenly, your mistakes stop being enemies and start being teachers. Emotionally, this practice is liberating. Each repeated failure feels less like fate and more like a code waiting to be cracked. You start to recognize that the universe isn't conspiring against you. You've simply been replaying the same script, and scripts can be rewritten. That realization replaces despair with power, because now every misstep is a breadcrumb leading you towards strength. The greatest innovators, leaders, and strategists all obsess over their errors, not to wallow, but to decode. They know that buried inside the repetition of mistakes lies the truth about who they are and who they could become once they stop running from the patterns that bind them. Guess before checking. Guessing before checking is a mental trick that sharpens your intuition and ingrains knowledge far more deeply than passive learning ever could. Most people consume information like spectators. They read answers, look up solutions, or wait for explanations without ever daring to predict the outcome. But when you force yourself to guess first, you activate curiosity, engagement, and memory. Even if you're wrong, the act of prediction primes your brain to latch onto the truth with greater intensity, making it stick in a way that mere observation never does. Psychologically, guessing before checking harnesses the power of the generation effect. When your brain struggles to generate an answer, it builds neural pathways tied to that effort. When you later discover the correct answer, those pathways light up and fuse the knowledge into long-term memory. Wrong guesses don't weaken you. They strengthen retention by creating a contrast between what you thought and what reality revealed. That friction is the spark of real learning. Emotionally, guessing transforms passive frustration into playful challenge. Instead of dreading the unknown, you lean into it. You stop fearing mistakes and start embracing them as necessary stepping stones. Every guess becomes a mini experiment, every correction a victory. Over time, you develop not just sharper recall, but also stronger confidence in your ability to navigate uncertainty. This is why great thinkers, scientists, and strategists always hypothesize before they test. They know that the act of guessing isn't about being right. It's about training the mind to engage with reality instead of drifting past it. Guessing before checking forces you to care, and in caring, you learn faster than those who simply consume answers. Use 80-20 thinking. The 80-20 principle, also known as the Pareto rule, is one of the most powerful mental models you can adopt because it rewires how you see effort, results, and value. At its core, it says that 80% of your results come from just 20% of your actions. Yet most people scatter their energy evenly across everything, blind to the fact that a small handful of inputs are creating almost all the impact. When you learn to think in 80-20, you stop wasting your life on noise and start obsessing over leverage. Psychologically, this principle is liberating. It teaches you to stop chasing perfection and instead hunt for the high-yield actions that actually move the needle. In business, it's usually 20% of customers who generate 80% of revenue. In relationships, it's 20% of connections that bring 80% of your joy. In learning, it's 20% of concepts that deliver 80% of mastery. Once you train your mind to look for these leverage points, you become ruthlessly efficient. Emotionally, 80-20 thinking feels like waking up from a trance. Suddenly, you realize how much of your stress, exhaustion, and frustration comes from pouring effort into things that don't matter. You begin to let go of the trivial, the draining, the false urgencies, and redirect that energy into the few actions that change everything. The sense of control this brings is intoxicating. You're no longer spinning in circles, but striking directly at the core of progress. Most people drown in the 80% of distractions. The few who discipline themselves to identify and live in the 20% rise faster, think clearer, and achieve more with less. 80-20 isn't just efficiency, it's power. Explain like you're 5. Explaining like you're 5 is not about dumbing things down, it is about sharpening your understanding until it becomes crystal clear. Most people hide behind jargon, complexity, and long-winded explanations because they don't fully grasp what they're talking about. But when you force yourself to explain something simply enough that even a child could understand, you strip away the fluff and expose the essence. Simplicity is not weakness, it is the ultimate proof of mastery. Psychologically, this technique rewires the way you interact with information. Teaching forces retrieval, restructuring, and reorganization in your brain. The act of breaking concepts into childlike language removes illusions of knowledge. You either understand it deeply or you stumble. It is in that stumbling that growth begins. This is why scientists, inventors, and leaders who can communicate with elegant simplicity are remembered far more than those who speak in convoluted brilliance. Emotionally, the 5-year-old explanation disarms people. Complexity intimidates, but simplicity invites. When you explain something in plain terms, people lean in because you make them feel intelligent rather than inadequate. You connect across levels of experience, bridging gaps between the expert and the beginner. And in doing so, you establish trust, credibility, and even authority. Think of history's great communicators. They didn't just know their craft, they made others feel like they could know it too. That is the hidden power of this method. It makes your knowledge contagious. Anyone can complicate, only the wise can simplify. And when you explain like someone is 5, you prove to yourself and the world that you don't just know the information, you own it. Think in decades, act in days. Thinking in decades while acting in days is a mental framework that collapses time into both vision and urgency. Most people get it backwards. They obsess over short-term results without a guiding vision, or they dream endlessly without ever moving in the present. But when you hold a 10-year horizon in your mind while taking disciplined action today, you align yourself with the rare rhythm of true progress. It gives you the patience to endure and the fire to execute. Psychologically, this duality frees you from extremes. The decade mindset calms anxiety by reminding you that greatness takes time. Failure today does not define the future. At the same time, acting in days prevents paralysis by breaking massive goals into small, controllable steps. Your brain finds relief in knowing you don't need to conquer everything at once, only today's piece of the puzzle. Each day becomes a micro win stacked toward a colossal outcome. Emotionally, this approach fuels resilience. When setbacks strike, you zoom out to decades and see that the obstacle is just a single chapter in a long book. The pain feels smaller when placed against a vast horizon. Yet when temptation whispers to procrastinate, the daily frame snaps you back into urgency. You don't waste today because today is the only brick you can actually lay. This is why the most powerful builders of empires, movements, and legacies live in this paradox. They are dreamers with a horizon so vast it humbles them, yet workers with a discipline so sharp it terrifies others. To think in decades and act in days is to hold the patience of time in one hand and the urgency of mortality in the other, and that balance is unstoppable. Visualize constraints as tools. Most people see constraints as chains, restrictions that suffocate freedom and limit potential, but the sharpest minds flip this perception upside down. They visualize constraints as tools. Instead of seeing a lack of resources, time, or freedom as a disadvantage, they recognize these limits as hidden engines of creativity. When boundaries press against you, they don't just confine you, they shape you, forcing your brain to innovate in ways it never would if given unlimited options. Psychologically, abundance paralyzes. Too many choices scatter focus, and too much freedom often leads to procrastination. But constraints sharpen attention like a blade. A writer with no deadline drifts endlessly, while a writer with 1 hour produces with urgency. An entrepreneur with unlimited funds wastes them, while one strapped for cash invents cost-effective solutions that disrupt entire industries. The very thing you think is holding you back is often the spark that makes you extraordinary. Emotionally, embracing constraints transforms frustration into fuel. Instead of asking, "Why don't I have more?" you begin to ask, "How can I make the most of what I do have?" That shift ignites resourcefulness and resilience. It feels empowering to realize that your so-called limitations are not barriers, they are springboards. The lack becomes the lever. History proves this again and again. Masterpieces of art created with primitive tools, breakthroughs in science born from scarce funding, revolutions launched with almost nothing but willpower. The pattern is undeniable. When you visualize constraints as tools, you stop waiting for ideal conditions and start creating with what's in front of you. And it's that alchemy, turning scarcity into strength, that separates inventors from imitators. Use deliberate pauses. Deliberate pauses are the secret weapon of presence, the subtle art of making silence speak louder than words. While most people race through conversations, afraid of stillness, the person who pauses intentionally commands the room without lifting their voice. A pause placed before or after your words creates weight, giving your message gravity, making others lean in and forcing them to feel the importance of what you just said or are about to say. Neurologically, pauses trigger anticipation. The human brain craves rhythm and completion, so when you break the flow with silence, it creates tension. That tension hooks attention. Your audience cannot drift away because they are waiting for release. Great orators, actors, and leaders master this instinctive pull, knowing that a well-timed pause makes their words echo long after they're spoken. Psychologically, deliberate pauses create space for both you and the listener. They give you time to choose words with precision, protecting you from impulsive mistakes. For the other person, the pause feels like respect, as if you're giving their words room to breathe, acknowledging their importance. In arguments, it diffuses escalation. In negotiations, it pressures the other side to fill the silence with information, often revealing more than they intended. Emotionally, pauses amplify impact. A confession, a compliment, a demand, all strike harder when framed with silence. The break tells the other person, "This matters. Pay attention," and they do. Deliberate pauses transform ordinary speech into something magnetic. They are the difference between noise and resonance, between being heard and being unforgettable. Most people fear silence. The few who master it use it to bend conversations and people toward their will. Switch perspectives intentionally. Switching perspectives intentionally is the art of stepping outside your own mind and slipping into the eyes, emotions, and motives of someone else. Most people are locked in the prison of their own viewpoint, unable to see beyond their biases, assumptions, and desires. But when you deliberately shift perspectives, you unlock hidden angles, invisible truths, and insights that the average person will never discover. This practice is not just empathy, it is strategy. Psychologically, switching perspectives forces your brain to override egocentric bias, the default tendency to assume your view of reality is the only one that matters. By asking yourself, how does this look from their side? What would I think if I were them? You trigger neural pathways that expand flexibility and problem solving. Suddenly, what seemed like a conflict becomes a misunderstanding, and what seemed impossible reveals an alternative route. Perspective is not fixed, it's a lens. Change the lens, and the entire picture transforms. Emotionally, this shift is powerful. It makes you harder to manipulate because you can predict the intentions of others. It makes you more persuasive because you can speak directly to the fears, desires, and beliefs of the person in front of you. It also makes you resilient because you stop seeing setbacks as personal failures and start seeing them as part of a larger system. When you switch perspectives, you step out of victimhood and into control. Leaders, negotiators, and visionaries all master this art. They are able to stand in someone else's shoes, look back at themselves, and adjust their moves accordingly. The world bends for those who can shift perspectives at will because they are never trapped in one reality. They command many. Count to 10 before reacting. Counting to 10 before reacting is an ancient yet profoundly effective mental discipline that transforms raw impulse into controlled power. Most people are slaves to their emotions. An insult triggers rage, a setback sparks despair, a provocation demands an immediate strike. But in those first seconds after a trigger, your brain is flooded with adrenaline, and if you act instantly, you hand over your control to emotion. By simply counting to 10, you create a protective buffer between stimulus and response, turning reaction into choice. Psychologically, this pause engages the rational part of your brain. The amygdala, your emotional alarm system, fires first in moments of stress, but the prefrontal cortex, the seat of judgment and reasoning, needs time to catch up. Those 10 seconds are enough to shift the balance of power from emotion to logic. What felt urgent and explosive a moment ago often looks smaller, less threatening, even laughable by the time you reach 10. Emotionally, the count saves relationships, reputations, and opportunities. Words spoken in heat can scar permanently, and actions taken in fury often backfire. But when you force yourself to wait, you rob anger of its control. The energy dissipates, clarity returns, and you regain dominance over yourself. People notice this restraint. The one who does not lash out when provoked commands respect, because their silence and composure radiate strength. Counting to 10 is not weakness. It is delayed firepower. It is the difference between a wild flame that destroys and a controlled spark that lights the path forward. Each number you count is a reclaiming of power, a reminder that you own your emotions. They do not own you. Ask, what's the signal versus noise? In a world drowning in information, the ability to separate signal from noise is a mental survival skill. Most people consume everything as if it's equally valuable, every headline, every opinion, every data point, until their minds are cluttered with distractions and contradictions. But when you ask, what's the signal versus noise, you force your brain to cut through chaos and focus on the few truths that actually matter. The signal is what drives outcomes. The noise is everything that distracts you from it. Psychologically, this question reprograms attention. The human brain is naturally drawn to novelty and stimulation, which is why gossip, rumors, and irrelevant details hijack focus so easily. But signals are rarely loud. They're subtle, hidden beneath layers of noise. Training yourself to filter for signals strengthens analytical thinking because it demands discernment. You begin to ask, what's essential here? What's just static? What moves the needle? Over time, this makes you immune to the overload that drowns others. Emotionally, distinguishing signal from noise protects your sanity. Every day you are bombarded with opinions telling you what to fear, what to chase, what to care about. Most of it is noise designed to manipulate. But when you learn to ignore it, you reclaim mental clarity. You stop reacting to every distraction and instead anchor yourself to the few patterns, trends, and truths that genuinely matter to your goals. This is why the best investors, strategists, and leaders obsess over this question. They don't care about being busy. They care about being effective. By asking, what's the signal versus noise? You cut through the fog and lock onto the frequency that others are too distracted to hear. Practice mindful observation. Mindful observation is the discipline of truly seeing the world around you, of piercing through the blur of autopilot and noticing details others overlook. Most people sleepwalk through life, their minds trapped in the past or future, blind to the richness of the present. But when you slow down and observe with intention, everything sharpens: the colors, the patterns, the movements, the unspoken signals. You begin to catch what others miss, and that awareness becomes a quiet form of intelligence that feels almost supernatural. Neurologically, mindful observation rewires your brain to stay anchored in the moment. It strengthens your ability to notice subtle shifts, from micro expressions on a person's face to patterns in behavior that predict outcomes. Over time, this practice builds a mental catalog of cues and insights, giving you faster instincts and sharper judgment. It's the same principle that makes great detectives, negotiators, and artists extraordinary. They notice the invisible threads holding everything together. Psychologically, it trains you to step out of reactivity. Instead of being pulled into every emotion or distraction, you become the watcher, the one who sees without immediately acting. This distance gives you clarity and control, allowing you to respond with intention rather than impulse. Emotionally, mindful observation reconnects you to life itself. The way light hits a window, the tension in someone's posture, the silence between words, all become signals, textures, stories. The world stops being flat and starts becoming alive. And when you carry that awareness into interactions, people feel it. They sense that you are fully present, deeply attuned. It makes you magnetic because in a world full of distraction, true attention feels like power. Replace opinions with data. Replacing opinions with data is a mental discipline that separates emotion-driven guesses from truth anchored in reality. Most people live in a fog of assumptions, repeating beliefs they've heard, clinging to feelings that masquerade as facts. But when you force yourself to seek data instead of leaning on opinion, you sharpen your mind like a blade against stone. Suddenly, conversations stop being arguments of ego and become battles of evidence. And in those battles, clarity always wins. Psychologically, the brain is wired for confirmation bias, instinctively searching for proof that supports what it already believes. Replacing opinions with data disrupts this bias. Instead of asking, "How do I feel about this?" you ask, "What does the evidence show?" This single shift moves you from reactive thinking to analytical thinking, from blind confidence to measured certainty. It forces you to slow down, investigate, and anchor your conclusions in something solid. Emotionally, this habit builds both humility and authority. Humility, because you accept that your personal feelings or assumptions may be wrong. Authority, because when you do speak, your words carry weight. They are backed by proof rather than wishful thinking. In a debate, it makes you unshakable. In decision-making, it makes you trustworthy. Others drown in their opinions, but you rise above with the power of verifiable truth. The world is noisy with speculation, half-truths, and emotional outbursts. Those who replace opinions with data cut through that noise like a scalpel. They see patterns others miss, make decisions that last, and influence with a force that cannot be dismissed. Data doesn't just make you smarter, it makes you undeniable. Use what-if scenarios. Using what-if scenarios is a mental trick that bends reality and unlocks doors most people never even realize exist. The majority live trapped inside fixed assumptions. This is how it is. This is how it must be. But the moment you start asking, what if, you break free from the prison of certainty and give your brain permission to explore possibilities beyond the obvious. It's a question that reshapes the boundaries of imagination and reveals paths hidden in plain sight. Psychologically, what if unleashes creativity by bypassing the brain's natural resistance to change. Instead of shutting down ideas with "that won't work," the mind treats the scenario as hypothetical, which lowers its defenses. This is why children dream effortlessly. They live in a constant state of what if. By reclaiming this mode of thinking as adults, you reactivate the same neural pathways that fuel innovation and discovery. Some of the world's greatest inventions, businesses, and breakthroughs began with a single what if whispered in the dark. Emotionally, what if transforms fear into curiosity. Instead of dreading the worst, you can flip the script. What if it works? What if I succeed? What if this risk changes everything? These shifts spark courage because your mind starts picturing not just failure, but possibility. The emotional charge of hope is often enough to move you where fear would have frozen you. What-if scenarios aren't daydreams. They're mental laboratories where risk is safe, boundaries dissolve, and futures are forged. Each time you ask it, you break the chains of what is and step into the raw territory of what could be. Keep mental checklists. Keeping mental checklists is a deceptively simple practice that transforms chaos into clarity. Most people rely on memory alone, assuming they'll recall everything they need in the right moment, only to find themselves stumbling, forgetting, or second-guessing. A mental checklist acts like an inner compass. It orders your thoughts, structures your actions, and creates a sense of calm control in situations that overwhelm everyone else. Pilots, surgeons, and elite soldiers don't trust memory. they trust checklists. And when you internalize this habit, your mind becomes razor sharp under pressure. Psychologically, mental checklists fight against the brain's natural flaws. Human memory is biased, easily distracted, and prone to gaps. But when you have a sequence of steps hardwired into your thinking, you bypass forgetfulness and free up mental energy for creativity and problem solving. The checklist becomes a safety net, ensuring you never miss the essentials, even in moments of high stress. Emotionally, checklists soothe anxiety. There's power in knowing you've covered your bases, in feeling the structure hold you when uncertainty strikes. A mental checklist before a speech can calm nerves. A mental checklist before a decision can reduce doubt. It transforms fear of, "What if I forget?" into the confidence of, "I know I'm prepared." The greatest strength of mental checklists is not rigidity, but adaptability. You refine them with experience, shaping them to fit your life and challenges. Over time, they become instinct, automatic habits that guide you without conscious effort. Most people stumble through life reacting to chaos. The ones who build and carry invisible checklists stride forward with quiet precision, always one step ahead. Zoom out before zooming in. Zooming out before zooming in is the mental habit of seeing the bigger picture before getting lost in the details. Most people obsess over fragments of a problem, trapped in the weeds, unable to realize that the piece they're analyzing only makes sense when viewed as part of a larger whole. By pulling back first, you gain context, perspective, and clarity. Only then do you dive into the fine details with precision, armed with an understanding of how each part fits into the greater system. Psychologically, this shift rewires your thinking from reactive to strategic. The brain loves to hyperfocus on what's directly in front of it, but without the broader view, even smart solutions can backfire. A decision that seems brilliant in the moment might be disastrous when seen in the larger frame. By zooming out first, you protect yourself from tunnel vision, you spot hidden connections, and you uncover root causes instead of chasing symptoms. Neurologically, this habit engages both divergent and convergent thinking. Zooming out taps into creativity, big picture analysis, and holistic reasoning. Zooming in activates detail-oriented problem solving. The genius lies in moving fluidly between the two, never losing sight of the whole while perfecting the parts. Emotionally, zooming out provides calm. The small frustrations that feel overwhelming lose their grip when you see them as tiny pieces of a much bigger journey. It gives you perspective, a sense of control, and the confidence that today's obstacle is just one step in a larger path. Those who master this balance think like architects, not laborers, always building with vision before execution. Break down big goals. Breaking down big goals is the difference between dreaming and actually achieving. Most people stare at the mountain of what they want to accomplish and freeze, overwhelmed by its sheer size. The vision excites them, but the weight paralyzes them. The trick is to slice that mountain into steps, so small that progress feels inevitable. Each piece becomes a manageable path forward, and before you realize it, the impossible no longer feels intimidating. It feels inevitable. Psychologically, breaking down goals works because the brain craves clarity and small wins. A massive, vague ambition drains willpower, but specific, achievable steps trigger dopamine with every completion. This rewires your motivation system, making action addictive instead of exhausting. Suddenly, writing a book isn't 500 pages, it's one paragraph today. Building a business isn't launching an empire, it's sending one email, making one call, creating one product. Small steps compound into unstoppable momentum. Emotionally, this practice transforms fear into confidence. Nothing fuels doubt more than standing still, but nothing builds self-belief faster than visible progress. Every small step forward whispers, "I can do this," until that whisper becomes a roar. The anxiety of the unknown is replaced with the pride of steady movement. Even setbacks lose their sting because they no longer mean starting over. They just mean adjusting the next step. Big goals seduce everyone, but only those who know how to dissect them into pieces ever taste victory. Breaking down goals is not about shrinking your dreams. It's about building a staircase to reach them. Each small piece conquered is proof that the mountain is climbable and that you are stronger than the size of the challenge ahead. Notice body language. Noticing body language is like learning to read the hidden subtitles of human interaction. Words can lie, but the body rarely does. Every glance, every shift in posture, every twitch of the mouth tells a story. The speaker may be unwilling or unable to put into words. When you train yourself to observe these subtle signals, you gain access to an unspoken layer of truth that most people miss. You stop hearing just what someone says and start hearing what they mean. Psychologically, the body leaks information because emotions live deeper than language. Anxiety shows itself in restless hands. Deception flickers in micro-expressions too fast to fake, and confidence radiates in expansive gestures. The brain struggles to control these leaks, which is why body language often reveals the reality words try to disguise. By paying attention, you can separate surface appearances from hidden intentions, giving yourself an edge in trust, persuasion, and protection. Emotionally, this awareness heightens connection. When you notice someone leaning forward, mirroring your movements, or holding eye contact longer than usual, you sense their interest before they ever admit it. When you see crossed arms or a subtle shift away, you feel their resistance instantly. This sensitivity allows you to respond with empathy, to adjust your own presence, and to make others feel deeply understood, sometimes without a single word exchange. This is why leaders, negotiators, and influencers are masters of body language. They don't just watch, they read, decode, and respond to the silent messages flowing through every gesture. The body cannot hide its truth, and the one who learns to notice it holds a power that words alone will never grant. Rehearse conversations in your head. Rehearsing conversations in your head is not about scripting every word. It's about stepping into the future and preparing your mind for the battlefield of human interaction. Most people walk into important talks unprepared, hoping improvisation will carry them, only to stumble, ramble, or freeze. But when you mentally rehearse, you transform uncertainty into confidence. You play out scenarios, anticipate reactions, and sharpen your delivery until your words feel like weapons already tested before battle. Psychologically, this rehearsal strengthens neural pathways, making the actual conversation feel familiar when it happens. The brain doesn't fully distinguish between imagined practice and real experience, so every mental run-through conditions you for success. When the real moment comes, your mind recognizes it, not as a threat, but as déjà vu, and you respond with calm precision instead of panic. Emotionally, rehearsal gives you power over fear. Nerves lose their grip when you've already lived the conversation multiple times in your head. You've felt the tension, navigated objections, delivered your points, and walked away with composure, all before it even begins. That preparation translates into a magnetic confidence others can feel. This technique is why great speakers, negotiators, and leaders seem unshakable. Their calm isn't luck, it's preparation hidden in plain sight. By rehearsing conversations, they strip away uncertainty and walk in armed with clarity. While others stumble through their words, they glide through theirs with intention. And the person who controls the words in a conversation often ends up controlling the outcome. Draw problems. Drawing problems is the practice of pulling chaos out of your head and putting it into a form you can see. Most people wrestle with challenges in their minds, letting thoughts spiral endlessly until they feel stuck, confused, or overwhelmed. But the moment you sketch the problem, whether through diagrams, mind maps, or even crude stick figures, You transform the intangible into something visible and concrete. What felt like a storm becomes a structure. Neurologically, the act of drawing engages different parts of the brain than verbal thinking alone. It activates spatial reasoning, visual memory, and creative pattern recognition, which allows you to process complexity in new ways. When you see the pieces laid out on paper, connections emerge that your linear thoughts would never have uncovered. It's why engineers diagram systems, why generals sketch battle plans, and why innovators scribble ideas. Visuals reveal truths words cannot. Psychologically, drawing problems reduces mental load. Thoughts that circle endlessly in your head lose their power when externalized. You no longer have to juggle every detail in working memory, freeing your brain to analyze rather than just hold on. This mental clarity is often the difference between paralysis and breakthrough. Emotionally, the process brings relief and control. The problem that once felt like an invisible monster now sits in front of you, captured, defined, and shrinkable. It turns the overwhelming into something you can poke at, move around, and dissect piece by piece. While most people drown in the abstract weight of their problems, you sketch them into submission, and in doing so, you take command of them. Spot recurring themes. Spotting recurring themes is the mental art of noticing the patterns that others overlook, the echoes that reveal hidden truths beneath the noise of life. Most people see events as random and disconnected, stumbling from one situation to the next without recognizing that life often whispers the same lessons until you finally pay attention. When you learn to spot themes that repeat in conversations, mistakes, relationships, or decisions, you unlock a deeper layer of awareness that turns chaos into clarity. Psychologically, this works because the brain is a pattern recognition machine. It constantly scans for familiarity, but most people are too distracted to connect the dots. By deliberately asking, "Where have I seen this before?" you force your mind to link moments across time. Suddenly, the fight you're having today echoes one from years ago. The problem at work mirrors an old failure, and the story someone tells reveals the same underlying fear you've heard before. Recognizing these connections gives you foresight, allowing you to anticipate outcomes and act with precision. Emotionally, spotting recurring themes is powerful because it reveals cycles that silently govern behavior. If the same problems keep resurfacing in your life, it's not coincidence, it's a signal. A toxic pattern in relationships, a repeated weakness in habits, or a theme in the way others respond to you all carry messages you cannot afford to ignore. By seeing the repetition, you gain the power to break free from loops that trap most people in frustration. Those who ignore patterns are doomed to relive them. Those who spot them rise above, armed with the knowledge that life doesn't just repeat itself randomly, it repeats itself to be understood. And once you understand the theme, you can change the story. Use metaphors. Using metaphors is one of the most powerful ways to bypass resistance and etch your ideas directly into the mind of others. Facts speak to logic, but metaphors speak to imagination, to emotion, to the deep part of us that remembers stories long after data fades. When you compare a complex idea to something familiar, you transform the abstract into the tangible, the complicated into the unforgettable. A metaphor is not just an explanation, it is a bridge from the known to the unknown. Psychologically, metaphors work because the human brain is wired to think in associations. When you say time is money or anger is fire, the mind instantly understands the connection without needing a lecture. You compress volumes of meaning into a single phrase, and the listener not only grasps it, they feel it. This is why the greatest teachers, leaders, and persuaders throughout history rarely spoke in pure logic. They spoke in metaphors that wrapped truth in imagery and planted it deep in memory. Emotionally, metaphors bypass defenses. A direct command often meets resistance, but a metaphor slides beneath conscious judgment. shaping perception without triggering walls. A doctor explaining cancer as weeds in a garden brings comfort and clarity where fear once lived. A leader describing a challenge as a storm we must sail through transforms dread into shared courage. People don't just hear metaphors, they step inside them and experience them. To use metaphors is to wield language as a spell. You don't just communicate, you create worlds, invite others into them, and reshape how they see reality itself. Where logic fails to move hearts, metaphors ignite them. Remove one assumption. Removing one assumption is a mental trick that unlocks hidden possibilities most people never see. Every decision, every belief, every plan you make is built on invisible assumptions, beliefs you take for granted without questioning. The problem is, assumptions act like walls around your thinking. They define the limits of what you believe is possible, often without you realizing it. But when you strip just one of those assumptions away, the walls crack open and suddenly the problem looks completely different. Psychologically, assumptions are mental shortcuts. They save energy by giving you a framework to operate within, but they also blind you. If you assume something must be done a certain way, you'll never even consider alternatives. Removing an assumption forces your brain into uncharted territory. It disrupts autopilot thinking and awakens creativity because now your mind is forced to construct a new path where none existed. Emotionally, this practice is both unsettling and exhilarating. Challenging assumptions means confronting the comfortable stories you've been living inside. Stories about what you're capable of, what resources you need, or what rules can't be broken. The moment you remove one, you feel both disoriented and free, like a prisoner realizing the cell door was never locked. That shock is what creates breakthroughs. History is full of innovators who simply removed one assumption: that phones had to have buttons, that cars had to run on fuel, that flight was impossible for humans. The pattern is the same. Where most people saw boundaries, they asked, what if this rule doesn't exist? The power lies not in adding complexity, but in daring to remove one invisible chain and watching the entire system transform. Think, what would an outsider say? Asking yourself, what would an outsider say, is the mental escape hatch from bias, ego, and tunnel vision. When you're trapped inside a problem, your emotions and assumptions blur the truth. But the moment you step outside yourself and imagine how a neutral observer would see the situation, the fog begins to lift. Outsiders don't carry your baggage, your fears, or your pride. They see what is there, not what you wish was there. And that shift in perspective is often where solutions hide. Psychologically, this trick taps into cognitive reframing. By simulating an outsider's view, you trick your brain into detachment, which weakens the grip of emotional bias. Suddenly, the drama that felt all-consuming shrinks into something simple, maybe even obvious. What you thought was a crisis might look like impatience. What you thought was failure might look like progress in disguise. This perspective is why consultants, mentors, and therapists can cut straight to the truth. You can do the same for yourself by adopting their lens. Emotionally, imagining the outsider strips away the ego. It forces you to see yourself not as the hero of your own narrative, but as one character in a larger story. Would an outsider respect your choice or see it as foolish pride? Would they admire your struggle or laugh at the excuses you've been hiding behind? The answers sting, but they also free you. When you think like an outsider, you stop drowning in your own noise and start perceiving reality with clarity. While most stay blind within their own story, you gain the rare power of perspective, the ability to see yourself as others truly would. Notice emotional triggers. Noticing emotional triggers is the practice of shining a light on the invisible strings that control your reactions. Most people walk through life unaware of what sets them off, erupting in anger, sinking into sadness, or shutting down with fear without ever asking why. But when you learn to identify the specific words, situations, or behaviors that spark these reactions, you begin to reclaim control over yourself. You stop being a puppet pulled by hidden forces and start becoming the one holding the strings. Psychologically, emotional triggers live in the subconscious, buried beneath layers of memory and past experiences. They are often formed in childhood through trauma, rejection, or repeated patterns of pain. When something in the present resembles that old wound, even faintly, your nervous system reacts as if the past is happening all over again. That's why a harmless comment can feel like an attack, or a small failure can feel like the end of the world. By noticing these triggers, you catch the connection, separating past ghosts from present reality. Emotionally, this awareness is liberating. It allows you to pause instead of explode, to reflect instead of spiral. Instead of being consumed by the heat of the reaction, you step back and ask, why does this hit me so hard? What wound is this pressing on? That shift alone turns pain into insight, and insight into strength. In relationships and leadership, this awareness makes you magnetic. You not only understand your own emotional landscape, but you begin to notice triggers in others. You see what makes them shrink, what makes them flare, what makes them feel alive. And with that knowledge, you can connect, influence, and heal in ways that most people never will. Distill ideas into 3 words. Distilling ideas into 3 words is a mental discipline that forges clarity out of chaos. Most people drown in overcomplication. They ramble, they over-explain, they bury their point in endless detail. But when you strip an idea down to its essence and express it in just 3 words, you wield a weapon of precision. Those 3 words become unforgettable, cutting through noise and branding themselves into memory like a scar. Simplicity isn't weakness, it's power refined. Psychologically, this compression forces your brain into ruthless focus. To capture the core of an idea in 3 words, you must sift away everything non-essential until only the truth remains. It's a test of understanding. If you can't shrink it, you don't truly grasp it. The mind thrives on triads. 3 is the smallest number that feels complete, so the result resonates naturally, making it stick in ways long explanations never could. Emotionally, 3 words strike harder than paragraphs. They carry rhythm, punch, and finality. Think of movements defined by 3-word mantras. Just do it. Never give up. Time is money. Each phrase is a blade that pierces straight through the heart and lingers. People rally behind such brevity because it feels absolute, sharp, and undeniable. To distill ideas into 3 words is to seize control of perception. It makes you memorable in conversations, persuasive in debates, and magnetic as a leader. While most waste breath fumbling through explanations, you drop 3 words that echo long after the room falls silent. 3 words are not less. They are everything sharpened into a single strike. Focus on leading indicators. Focusing on leading indicators is the mental shift that allows you to see the future before it arrives. Most people obsess over lagging indicators, the results, the outcomes, the numbers that tell you what already happened. They wait until the grade is printed, the money is gone, the relationship is broken before they realize what was wrong. But by then, it's too late. Leading indicators are different. They're the subtle signals, the early behaviors, the small patterns that predict the bigger picture. If you learn to focus on them, you stop living reactively and start steering outcomes before they spiral out of control. Psychologically, leading indicators force your brain to zoom out of short-term gratification and track the patterns that actually create results. A student who only cares about exam scores is blind to the real leading indicator, daily study habits. A business that obsesses over quarterly revenue is already behind. The true predictor is customer satisfaction, engagement, or response rates. By training yourself to notice causes instead of waiting for consequences, you place yourself ahead of the curve. Emotionally, this shift gives you control, Nothing feels more defeating than realizing you were blindsided by an outcome you could have predicted. But when you focus on leading indicators, surprises shrink and confidence grows. You feel less like a victim of circumstance and more like an architect shaping the future in real time. This is why the most effective leaders, investors, and creators are obsessed with early signals. They ignore the noise of what has happened and zero in on the clues of what will happen. And that simple focus gives them an edge that feels almost like foresight. Pretend you're wrong. Pretending you're wrong is one of the most uncomfortable yet liberating mental tricks you can practice. Most people cling to their beliefs with iron fists, terrified of being exposed, terrified of losing face. But when you deliberately flip the script and argue against yourself, you unlock a deeper level of clarity that blind certainty can never provide. By asking, "What if I'm wrong?" you force your brain to explore evidence, alternatives, and truths that your pride has been working hard to ignore. Psychologically, this exercise dismantles confirmation bias, the brain's addiction to seeking only evidence that proves us right. When you adopt the position that you're wrong, you trick your mind into searching for contradictions, flaws, and overlooked details. This shift turns you from a defender of your ego into a seeker of truth. And ironically, those who are willing to challenge their own beliefs often end up more confident because they've tested their ideas against fire instead of sheltering them in comfort. Emotionally, pretending you're wrong is both humbling and empowering. It stings to see cracks in your convictions, but that sting builds resilience. You learn that being wrong doesn't destroy you, it strengthens you. It makes you adaptable, sharp, and fearless in the face of change. Leaders, innovators, and great thinkers thrive because they embrace this discomfort, while others run from it. When you pretend you're wrong, you step outside the prison of certainty. You stop worshiping your own opinion and start serving reality. Most people live blind, defending fragile beliefs. The few who test themselves with this brutal honesty become unshakable because they no longer fear being proven wrong. They've already gone there themselves. Ask who benefits. Asking who benefits is the mental scalpel that slices through confusion, exposing the hidden motives that shape decisions, systems, and behaviors. Most people take things at face value. They see rules, trends, or actions and assume they exist for fairness or necessity. But when you stop and ask, who actually gains from this, the world suddenly looks different. You begin to see the invisible hands pulling the strings, the beneficiaries behind every choice, and the quiet power plays most never notice. Psychologically, this question disrupts the brain's tendency to accept surface-level explanations. Humans crave simple stories, but reality is driven by incentives. When you ask who benefits, you force yourself to dig past appearances and identify the root driver of an action. A law that looks protective may actually serve corporations. A piece of advice that sounds kind may really serve the ego of the person giving it. Even your own habits reveal who benefits, you, your fears, or your distractions. Emotionally, this question feels unsettling because it peels back illusions we cling to for comfort. It forces you to admit that not everything is fair, not everyone is selfless, and not every system is designed to help you. But hidden in that discomfort is power, the ability to navigate reality without being naive. When you see the beneficiaries clearly, you cannot be manipulated as easily, and you begin making choices that serve your true interests rather than someone else's hidden agenda. The world runs on incentives, not ideals. Those who never ask who benefits stay blind, living by stories fed to them. Those who do ask see the truth that behind every rule, every action, every outcome, someone always gains. The key is knowing who. Ask who benefits. Asking who benefits is a razor-sharp mental trick that slices through appearances and exposes hidden motives. Most people accept information, rules, and narratives at face value, never questioning why they exist or who gains from them. But when you pause and ask this simple question, the world suddenly looks different. You begin to see that behind nearly every decision, policy, or story, there is someone positioned to profit, financially, socially, or psychologically. The surface explanation may be convenient, but the deeper truth is almost always revealed by following the trail of benefit. Psychologically, this question rewires your brain from passive acceptance into active skepticism. It trains you to pierce beyond the obvious and detect power dynamics at play. Why is this product marketed as essential? Why does this law exist in this exact form? Why is this person pushing me toward a particular choice? The answer usually lies not in morality or fairness, but in benefit. Asking this strips away illusions and shields you from manipulation. Emotionally, the shift can feel unsettling at first because it forces you to see a world less innocent than you once believed, but it also arms you with clarity. You stop feeling like a pawn moved by unseen hands and start reclaiming agency. The moment you realize who benefits, you realize how to position yourself, not as the one being used, but as the one who understands the game. This is why strategists, negotiators, and leaders live by this question. They know that the truth of any situation isn't in the words spoken, but in the gains collected. Ask who benefits, and you'll rarely be fooled again. Mentally time travel. Mentally time traveling is the art of stepping outside the prison of the present and moving your mind backward or forward in time to gain perspective. Most people are trapped in now, overwhelmed by current fears, blinded by immediate emotions, or paralyzed by today's problems. But when you deliberately project yourself into the past or future, you shatter that tunnel vision. You see patterns, consequences, and meanings that are invisible to those stuck in the moment. Psychologically, this trick expands your decision-making power. By jumping forward in your mind, 1 year, 5 years, even decades, you strip away the noise of temporary feelings and ask, will this still matter? What path will this choice put me on? Suddenly, problems that felt suffocating shrink into insignificance, while small daily habits reveal themselves as seeds of destiny. Traveling into the past works differently. You revisit mistakes, triumphs, or moments of resilience, and you mine them for lessons you forgot you already earned. Emotionally, mental time travel is liberation. When you're crushed under pressure, imagining your future self, looking back with gratitude, reframe struggle as necessary growth. When you're consumed by regret, revisiting the past, not with shame, but with curiosity, transforms pain into wisdom. You begin to realize you are not bound to this moment. You are a traveler moving across the timeline of your life, free to borrow strength and perspective from any point along it. This is why the wisest thinkers live as if they've already been here before and as if they've already seen where it leads. They bend time in their minds, and in doing so, they navigate the present with a calm that feels almost supernatural. Look for second-order effects. Looking for second-order effects is the practice of seeing beyond the immediate, of refusing to be blinded by the first outcome while ignoring the chain reaction that follows. Most people live trapped in short-term thinking. They act, they see the first result, and they stop there. But reality doesn't work in single moves. Every action creates ripples, and those ripples can either elevate you or destroy you. By training yourself to ask, and then what? You step into a dimension of foresight that most never even consider. Psychologically, this trick dismantles impulsive thinking. The brain is addicted to instant gratification and immediate feedback, but those who discipline themselves to trace outcomes further gain clarity others miss. A decision that looks brilliant in the short term can reveal itself as catastrophic when viewed through its second or third order consequences. For example, cutting corners at work might save time today, but it breeds distrust and inefficiency tomorrow. Ignoring this chain reaction is why so many smart people make foolish choices. Emotionally, seeing second-order effects builds patience and wisdom. It calms the urge to react, replacing it with the habit of foresight. Instead of chasing shiny opportunities, you ask, what doors will this open, and what doors will this quietly close? You begin to see the hidden costs behind temptations and the hidden rewards behind sacrifices. Second-order thinking separates visionaries from the short-sighted. While the masses stumble from one immediate consequence to another, you are already living in the future, shaping it by anticipating it. To master this is to see life not as a single move, but as a long game, one in which foresight becomes your greatest weapon. Practice selective ignorance. Practicing selective ignorance is the conscious choice to shut out the endless flood of noise that demands your attention and drain your mental energy. Most people drown in distractions, scrolling through every headline, reacting to every notification, consuming opinions that add no real value to their lives. They mistake information overload for intelligence, when in truth it only leaves them scattered, anxious, and unfocused. Selective ignorance is not stupidity, it is discipline. It is the refusal to let the trivial invade the space where greatness is built. Psychologically, this practice protects your limited cognitive bandwidth. Your brain has a finite capacity for decision-making and focus each day. Every meaningless argument, irrelevant news story, or petty drama you indulge in robs you of mental energy that could be invested in building skills, creating, or solving real problems. By ignoring the unimportant, you preserve sharpness for the things that matter most. Emotionally, selective ignorance feels like freedom. The weight of the world no longer crushes you because you refuse to carry what isn't yours. You stop being pulled into the chaos of others' lives, the outrage of the day, or the distractions designed to keep you weak. Instead, you reclaim peace, control, and inner strength. People around you may be consumed by noise, but you move with clarity, untouched, as if you live in a different reality. Great minds have always practiced selective ignorance. They were not ignorant of the world. They were ruthless about filtering what deserved their attention. In a culture where everyone is addicted to information, the rare person who ignores most of it gains an advantage: focus. And focus is the birthplace of mastery. Clarify definitions. Clarifying definitions is a deceptively simple yet devastatingly effective mental trick that instantly separates sharp thinkers from the confused masses. Most arguments, misunderstandings, and even wars are not battles of ideas, but battles of unclear words. People throw around terms like success, love, fair, or freedom as if they mean the same thing to everyone, but they don't. Without agreed-upon definitions, discussions spiral into endless circles of noise. The one who stops and asks, "What do you mean by that?" seizes control of the conversation because they force clarity where others flounder. Psychologically, unclear definitions trick the brain into thinking it understands when it doesn't. This false clarity creates illusion, and illusion breeds conflict. But when you dig into the meaning of words, you strip away vagueness and expose the truth. In negotiations, asking for definitions reveals hidden intentions. In debates, it dismantles the fog of rhetoric. In personal relationships, it prevents wounds born from miscommunication. Clarity is power, and definitions are its foundation. Emotionally, clarifying definitions disarms tension. A heated argument often cools the moment both sides realize they've been fighting over different meanings of the same word. What felt like opposition was simply misalignment. That realization creates relief, understanding, and resolution. On the flip side, forcing definitions can also expose deliberate deception, moments where someone is hiding behind vague language to manipulate perception. The greatest thinkers, from philosophers to leaders, obsess over definitions because they know precision is intelligence. If you can't define it, you can't defend it. If you can't define it, you can't build it. And if you can't define it, someone else will, and they will control the frame while you remain blind. Identify hidden incentives. Identifying hidden incentives is like pulling back the curtain on human behavior. On the surface, people claim to act out of principle, morality, or logic, but beneath those polished explanations lies the engine that truly drives decisions. Incentives, money, power, status, recognition, security, desire. These are the invisible levers shaping choices, often without the person themselves admitting it. The moment you train your mind to ask not just what someone is doing, but why they are motivated to do it, you begin to see the world with piercing clarity. Psychologically, incentives are the core programming of the brain. Every decision weighs reward versus cost, even when cloaked in noble language. A politician promising change may be chasing votes. A colleague offering help may be angling for favor. A friend's advice may be colored by their own fears or ambitions. When you strip away the narrative and look at the incentives, patterns that once seemed irrational suddenly make perfect sense. Incentives don't lie. They reveal the hidden architecture of behavior. Emotionally, uncovering incentives can feel both empowering and unsettling. It strips away illusions of purity, but it also arms you with foresight. You stop taking actions at face value, and you stop being blindsided by betrayal because you understand what people really want. At the same time, identifying incentives in yourself creates liberation. When you see what reward you're truly chasing, you can either embrace it consciously or adjust it instead of being unknowingly controlled by it. The smartest strategists in history obsess over incentives because they know that people don't move without them. If you can see the hidden incentive, you can predict the move. And if you can predict the move, you control the game. Anticipate objections. To anticipate objections is to step into the mind of others before they ever speak. Most people stumble when challenged. They defend, scramble, and react in ways that expose weakness. But those who anticipate objections walk into every interaction already armored. They've rehearsed the doubts, the criticisms, the resistance, and they are ready with answers. Instead of being blindsided, they appear composed, unshakable, and persuasive because nothing catches them off guard. Psychologically, anticipating objections forces your brain into dual perspective. You stop thinking only about what you want to say and start thinking about what the other person will resist. This expands empathy while sharpening strategy. By mentally preparing for counter-arguments, you reduce the emotional sting of hearing them out loud. The mind is calmer, more rational, because it has already lived the moment and prepared the response. Emotionally, anticipation transforms confrontation into control. Imagine standing in front of a crowd or across from a skeptic and hearing exactly what you predicted. Instead of anxiety, you feel a subtle satisfaction, like watching a script play out exactly as you wrote it. This confidence radiates, making your words harder to dismiss. People trust those who seem unfazed by resistance, because calmness signals authority. This is why great leaders, negotiators, and visionaries appear almost prophetic. They don't just pitch ideas, they dismantle doubt before it's spoken. They preempt resistance by addressing it head-on, making opposition feel weaker and less valid. To anticipate objections is to prove you've thought deeper than the crowd, and that depth makes others far more likely to follow where you lead. Write your thoughts, then invert them. Writing your thoughts and then inverting them is a mental exercise that slices through the illusions you build for yourself. When you spill your thoughts onto paper, they lose their fog and take on shape, concrete, undeniable, and real. But the true power comes when you turn them upside down. When you ask, what if the opposite is true? Suddenly, your safe beliefs shatter, your assumptions collapse, and you're forced to confront perspectives you would have otherwise ignored. Psychologically, this trick hijacks the brain's natural bias towards self-confirmation. Left unchecked, your mind bends reality to match what it already believes, but writing forces clarity and inversion forces challenge. If you write, "I can't succeed because I'm inexperienced," the inversion, "I can succeed precisely because I'm inexperienced," flips limitation into opportunity. This reversal doesn't just spark creativity, it rewires your brain to see hidden doors where before there were only walls. Emotionally, the effect is electrifying. Inversion is uncomfortable. It forces you to face truths that threaten your ego, but that discomfort is where growth lives. By examining the opposite of your thoughts, you loosen their grip on you. Fearful beliefs shrink, rigid opinions soften, and new possibilities open. The inversion acts like a mirror in which you glimpse not only what is, but what could be if you dared to think differently. Most people let their thoughts rule them in silence, never questioning, never flipping them over to test their strength. But when you write and invert, you become your own disruptor, your own challenger. You refuse to live in one-sided thinking, and in doing so, you train your mind to see the world from angles others cannot even imagine. Use thought experiments. Using thought experiments is the practice of bending reality inside your mind to test ideas, challenge assumptions, and uncover truths without needing to wait for life to play them out. Most people only think within the boundaries of what they see in front of them, trapped by the limits of their current circumstances. But thought experiments break those chains, allowing you to imagine worlds that don't exist, outcomes that haven't happened, and consequences that others are too afraid to consider. They give you the ability to practice with reality without risking anything at all. Psychologically, thought experiments sharpen reasoning by forcing your brain to step outside of comfort zones and run simulations, asking, "What if gravity suddenly doubled?" Or, "What if I had to live with this decision forever?" Pushes you beyond lazy thinking. It builds the ability to see beyond the obvious, revealing contradictions, flaws, or hidden possibilities. Philosophers like Descartes and Einstein relied on this technique, not because they had answers, but because they dared to ask impossible questions that open new paths of discovery. Emotionally, thought experiments are powerful because they strip away fear of the unknown. When you've already played out the scenario in your mind, the best case, the worst case, and everything in between, the future loses its ability to paralyze you. You become calmer, braver, and more decisive because you've rehearsed possibilities that others will be blindsided by. In daily life, this practice makes you magnetic. While others freeze in uncertainty, you've already tested the terrain in your imagination. You can speak with clarity, prepare for the unseen, and spot dangers before they strike. Thought experiments turn your mind into a laboratory where reality bends, and from that bending, brilliance emerges. Separate facts from interpretation. Separating facts from interpretation is one of the most powerful mental habits you can develop because it slices through bias, emotion, and manipulation with surgical precision. Most people blur the line between what actually happened and the story they tell themselves about it. A fact is raw reality. What was said, what was done, what exists. Interpretation is the meaning we attach to it, shaped by fear, desire, and perspective. Confusing the two is how lies spread, how conflicts escalate, and how people trap themselves in distorted realities. Psychologically, your brain is wired to create stories. It takes incomplete data and rushes to fill the gaps with meaning, often pulling from past experiences or emotions. Someone not texting you back becomes "they don't care." A colleague's silence becomes "they hate me." But those aren't facts, they're interpretations. By consciously separating the two, you stop being a prisoner of assumptions. You learn to see the event first, then decide what meaning, if any, you want to attach. Emotionally, this practice is liberating. It removes unnecessary suffering by cutting away invented stories. A harsh look from a stranger no longer ruins your day when you realize the only fact is they looked, and the rest is your projection. In arguments, this separation diffuses tension by forcing clarity. The fact is you didn't call. My interpretation is you don't care. Let's separate those. It turns accusations into understanding and turns conflict into conversation. The sharpest thinkers, leaders, and negotiators thrive on this skill. They know the battlefield isn't just facts, it's the interpretations built around them. By stripping away narrative, they see reality unclouded, while everyone else drowns in their own illusions. Ask, what am I missing? Asking, what am I missing, is a mental unlock that slices through arrogance and exposes hidden truths most people never see. The human mind craves certainty. It wants to believe the picture it has is complete, that the plan is airtight, that the conclusion is final. But certainty is a trap, and it blinds you to blind spots that quietly sabotage decisions, relationships, and opportunities. The moment you ask this question, you break the illusion of completeness and force your brain to search for the unseen. Psychologically, this question disrupts confirmation bias. Instead of hunting for evidence that proves you're right, you begin scanning for the cracks in your reasoning. That shift doesn't weaken your position, it strengthens it, because every flaw exposed early is one less flaw that can be used against you later. It trains your mind to think like a strategist, anticipating hidden variables before they detonate. Emotionally, asking what am I missing is an act of humility and strength combined. It signals to yourself and to others that you are not enslaved by ego, that you care more about truth than pride. This vulnerability disarms people. They open up, share insights, and reveal angles you never would have uncovered on your own. What once looked like weakness becomes a magnet for trust. This is why great innovators, leaders, and thinkers wield this question relentlessly. They know brilliance is never found in what's obvious. It hides in the missing pieces. While the majority cling to the comfort of certainty, the few who dare to ask this question gain the advantage of depth, foresight, and adaptability that others never touch. Find contradictions. Finding contradictions is the habit of hunting for cracks in logic, of refusing to accept smooth surfaces at face value. Most people crave coherence. They want stories, arguments, and beliefs to fit neatly together, so they overlook the inconsistencies hiding in plain sight. But those who search for contradictions discover truths buried under lies, weaknesses behind strength, and opportunities within chaos. Contradictions are not flaws to avoid. They are signals pointing toward deeper understanding. Psychologically, the brain resists contradictions because they create cognitive dissonance, that uncomfortable tension between what we believe and what reality shows us. Most people resolve it by ignoring the conflict, but the sharper mind leans in. If a leader preaches transparency but withholds information, if a friend promises loyalty but breaks trust, if a system claims efficiency yet drowns in inefficiency, these contradictions are red flags, flashing warnings that others choose not to see. Emotionally, contradictions stir intensity. They provoke discomfort, anger, even betrayal, because they expose hypocrisy and falsehood. But within that sting lies power. By noticing contradictions instead of avoiding them, you gain leverage over situations and people. You see the hidden fractures in arguments, the weak joints in structures, the pressure points in negotiations. What others accept blindly, you dissect with precision. Contradictions are where breakthroughs live. Science advances because experiments contradict assumptions. Growth happens when your old identity contradicts your new desires. Progress emerges from tension, not harmony. Most shy away from these moments, but if you make it your instinct to seek out contradictions, to trace them to their roots, you'll see truths that others cannot bear to face, and that will always make you sharper, faster, and more dangerous. Summarize daily learnings. Summarizing daily learnings is the practice of distilling the chaos of a full day into a handful of insights that lock growth into your memory. Most people live through their days passively, experiencing, reacting, moving on, only to wake up weeks later realizing nothing has truly stuck. But when you pause at the end of each day and ask, "What did I learn today?" you transform fleeting experiences into building blocks of wisdom. You stop letting life slip through your fingers and start capturing it. Psychologically, this technique strengthens memory consolidation. The brain naturally reviews and files information while you sleep, but if you consciously summarize your learnings before rest, you supercharge that process. By writing down or reflecting on the 3 key lessons of your day, you signal to your brain, "This matters, keep it." Over time, those small reflections accumulate into a treasure chest of insights, patterns, and personal truths that most people never collect. Emotionally, daily summarization creates presence. Instead of rushing endlessly toward tomorrow, you honor the lessons of today. It reduces the regret of wasted time because every day, no matter how ordinary or difficult, yields something valuable. Even mistakes and failures become gifts, because when you extract a lesson, the pain turns into progress. Those who summarize daily learnings evolve faster than those who don't, while others repeat the same mistakes and drift through cycles of forgetfulness. You sharpen awareness, see growth in real time, and carry each day forward as a stepping stone. Life stops being a blur of moments. It becomes a story written by your own hand with meaning woven into every page. Break arguments into premises. Breaking arguments into premises is a mental trick that transforms chaos into clarity. Most people hear an argument and react to its surface, emotionally charged words, confident delivery, or the weight of authority behind it. But the strength of any argument doesn't lie in its volume or its style. It lies in the structure beneath it. When you break an argument into its premises, each underlying claim that must be true for the conclusion to hold, you strip away noise and reveal whether it stands or collapses. Psychologically, this process engages the analytical core of your brain. Instead of being swept away by rhetoric, you slow down and dissect. For example, "We should trust him because he's successful." Premise 1, success equals honesty. Premise 2, he is successful. Premise 3, therefore he is honest. Suddenly, the flaw is exposed. Success does not guarantee honesty. By dismantling arguments into their building blocks, you see where assumptions masquerade as facts and where leaps in logic try to sneak past unnoticed. Emotionally, this gives you armor. Instead of feeling overwhelmed or manipulated by persuasive talk, you gain control. You don't need to raise your voice or counter with equal passion. You simply reveal the weak link in the chain. People respect this calm dismantling because it demonstrates intelligence without aggression, and in moments of conflict, this skill disarms opponents by making their position unravel under its own weight. Great thinkers, lawyers, and philosophers live by this discipline. They know that arguments are like buildings. Some look grand on the outside, but crumble if the foundation is weak. Break them into premises, and you stop being dazzled by appearances. You become the one who sees truth at its bones. Simulate both extremes. Simulating both extremes is the mental practice of stretching your imagination to the edges of possibility, asking yourself what happens if everything goes far better than expected, and what happens if everything collapses into disaster. Most people live trapped in the middle, paralyzed by vague uncertainty. But when you simulate both extremes, you strip uncertainty of its power. You prepare for chaos while also opening yourself to breakthroughs that fear would have hidden. Psychologically, this exercise expands your brain's tolerance for risk and clarity. By imagining the worst-case scenario in vivid detail, you desensitize yourself to fear. You see that even catastrophe has contours you can prepare for, that the monster in the dark shrinks once dragged into the light. At the same time, visualizing the best-case outcome fuels motivation, showing you what's at stake if you dare to push forward. Your mind now holds both edges of the spectrum, which makes the middle, the most likely outcome, far easier to handle with calm confidence. Emotionally, simulating extremes makes you unshakable. If you've already walked through the fire in your head, reality cannot surprise you. If you've already tasted the glory of success in your imagination, you move with hunger and belief instead of hesitation. Both visions pull you forward. Fear sharpens your preparation. Hope fuels your persistence. This is why world-class performers, soldiers, and entrepreneurs live by this mental trick. They train themselves to confront extremes long before they arrive. So when reality unfolds, they're neither shocked by failure nor blinded by success. They already know the edges of the map, and that knowledge makes them fearless in the middle where others freeze. Imagine the opposite outcome. Imagining the opposite outcome is the mental trick of breaking free from the trap of certainty. Most people fall in love with one vision: success, failure, victory, defeat, and lock themselves into it, blind to all other possibilities. But when you force yourself to picture the exact opposite of what you expect, you jolt your mind into a new dimension of clarity. The act feels unnatural, even unsettling, but it stretches your thinking beyond comfort and exposes realities you would never have considered. Psychologically, this technique dismantles the brain's addiction to linear thinking. If you're convinced your plan will succeed, imagining its failure forces you to confront vulnerabilities, blind spots, and weak foundations. If you're certain you'll fail, picturing success challenges your hopelessness and reveals the paths you've been ignoring. The opposite outcome acts as a mirror, reflecting hidden truths that only show up when you dare to invert your assumptions. Emotionally, this trick is electrifying because it destabilizes the illusion of control. It humbles you when you're overconfident and lifts you when you're in despair. That swing in perspective generates resilience. You no longer break when the unexpected happens because you've already lived through it in your mind. The shock that crushes others feels familiar to you, even manageable. Visionaries, strategists, and survivors all share this skill. They rehearse both triumph and disaster, preparing their minds for both extremes. While others collapse when reality strays from their expectations, you stay calm, already armed with foresight. Imagining the opposite outcome doesn't just expand perspective, it inoculates you against surprise, giving you a mental edge few ever develop. Use role models as mental guides. Using role models as mental guides is the practice of carrying great minds, leaders, and heroes inside your head as invisible mentors. Most people try to navigate life alone, trapped in their own limited perspective. But when you summon the voice of someone you admire, you suddenly gain access to a new way of thinking. It's like borrowing wisdom from the greatest minds in history, using their strength to shape your decisions in the present. Psychologically, this works because the brain responds to imagined role models almost as if they were real. When you ask yourself, what would Marcus Aurelius do? How would Elon Musk solve this? How would my grandmother handle this with grace? Your mind steps outside its normal pathways and adopts theirs. It's a form of cognitive modeling that rewires you for creativity, resilience, and clarity. You begin to anticipate not only your own choices, but the choices of giants whose footsteps you are learning to walk in. Emotionally, role models anchor you. In moments of fear, you can call upon the calm of a stoic. In times of ambition, you can channel the fire of an innovator. In love or conflict, you can borrow the empathy of someone you admire deeply. This inner counsel becomes a compass, reminding you that you are not alone and that the path you walk has been walked before by those who overcame the very struggles you now face. Those who rely only on themselves are limited to their own experience. Those who use role models as mental guides carry entire legacies within them, and in the silence of hard choices, it is often the imagined whisper of a guide that gives you the courage to take the step no one else would dare. Define success clearly. Defining success clearly is a mental discipline that shields you from chasing illusions. Most people never stop to ask themselves what success truly means, so they borrow definitions from society, family, or culture. They grind for wealth they don't need, status they don't care about, or approval that leaves them empty, all because they never set their own terms. But when you carve out your personal definition of success, you stop running in someone else's race and start building a life aligned with your own values. Psychologically, clarity of definition rewires motivation. The brain is goal-seeking by nature, but if the target is vague, it drifts aimlessly. I want to be successful is a foggy direction. I want to earn enough to live freely, work 4 hours less a week, and spend more time with my family is a precise compass. The clearer the definition, the more focused your decisions become. It eliminates distraction because you know exactly what moves you closer and what pulls you away. Emotionally, defining success frees you from comparison. Without clarity, you measure yourself against others and always feel behind. With clarity, you measure yourself against your own standard, and progress becomes deeply fulfilling. It replaces envy with purpose, insecurity with alignment, and burnout with balance. You no longer need the world's applause because you are following a vision that is entirely yours. The greatest trap is chasing a success that isn't yours. The greatest freedom is defining it so sharply that every step feels intentional. When you know what success means to you, you stop being led and start leading yourself. Cut problems in half. Cutting problems in half is the mental art of shrinking giants into something you can actually fight. Most people stare at problems in their full size, massive, overwhelming, impossible, and their minds shut down under the weight. But when you slice the problem in half, and then in half again, if necessary, you strip away the illusion of impossibility. The mountain becomes a series of hills, and each hill can be climbed. Psychologically, cutting problems in half dismantles paralysis. The brain is wired to avoid pain, and big, undefined challenges look like danger. That's why people procrastinate, stall, or panic. They're staring at the whole monster. But the moment you cut it down to smaller, more tangible pieces, the fear center calms, and the rational brain switches back on. Progress suddenly feels possible, because the fight is no longer against the whole beast, but against one limb at a time. Emotionally, this technique transforms dread into momentum. Each time you conquer half of a problem, you feel victory surging through you, and that momentum fuels the next step. Instead of sinking into despair, you start to crave progress. What once looked like endless struggle becomes a string of small wins. Each half-solved piece feels like reclaiming control. This is why problem solvers, inventors, and strategists all think this way. They don't waste time trying to swallow the ocean. They take one gulp at a time. To cut a problem in half is to declare war on overwhelm. It's a psychological blade that turns impossible into possible, chaos into order, and despair into a clear path forward. Ask, what if this continues? Asking, what if this continues, is the mental habit of projecting today into tomorrow, of stretching the present into the future to see where it truly leads. Most people live in short-term snapshots, reacting to what's in front of them without considering the trajectory behind it. But every habit, every choice, every trend carries momentum, and by asking this simple question, you uncover destinies long before they arrive. Psychologically, this trick breaks the brain's blindness to compounding effects. A single bad decision seems harmless in isolation, but repeated over time, it spirals into catastrophe. One ignored debt, one toxic relationship, one unhealthy habit. Multiply it by months or years, and the damage becomes inevitable. The reverse is just as true. One small improvement, one daily discipline, one smart investment, when continued, snowballs into extraordinary transformation. The mind resists this truth because it prefers immediacy, but this question forces it to confront inevitability. Emotionally, what if this continues? Pierces denial. It strips away the comfort of just this once and replaces it with a stark vision of what life will become if the pattern doesn't change. It shocks you into honesty about your health, your work, your relationships, by showing you the future you are silently building with your present choices. That vision can terrify or it can inspire, depending on the path you're on. This single question turns habits into fate and choices into prophecy. While most drift unconsciously into futures they never wanted, you hold the power to stop, adjust, or accelerate. Asking it makes you the author of your trajectory instead of the victim of it. Flip cause and effect. Flipping cause and effect is the mental trick of questioning the sequence you've been conditioned to believe and asking whether the chain of events might run in the opposite direction. Most people accept the story as it's told. This happened, so that happened. But hidden within those unquestioned stories are illusions, false assumptions, and truths that only appear when you reverse the order. Sometimes what you think is the cause is actually the result, and realizing that changes everything. Psychologically, flipping cause and effect disrupts lazy thinking. The human brain loves simple narratives because they make the world feel predictable, but reality is rarely that simple. Stress, for example, is often said to cause poor sleep. But what if poor sleep is actually the cause of stress? People say success brings confidence. But what if confidence, practiced early, is what creates success? By flipping the sequence, you force your brain to see the deeper mechanics at play, and that shift in perspective can reveal opportunities no one else can see. Emotionally, this practice is liberating. It breaks the chains of victimhood by revealing that what feels like an unavoidable effect might actually be a hidden cause within your control. Instead of believing, I'm unhappy because my life is chaotic, you can ask, is my life chaotic because I've been feeding unhappiness? That inversion gives you power where before there was only resignation. Most people live trapped in stories where effects seem permanent and causes seem untouchable. Those who flip cause and effect escape those illusions. They uncover hidden levers of control, expose false beliefs, and find paths that look invisible to everyone else. And in a world where perspective defines possibility, inversion is power. Track tiny improvements. Tracking tiny improvements is a mental trick that transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. Most people crave giant leaps, overnight transformations, dramatic breakthroughs, instant results. But the truth is, greatness is almost never built in explosions. It's built in grains, small, almost invisible progress, compounded day after day, becomes unstoppable momentum, while those waiting for a big break remain stuck. When you train yourself to notice and record even the smallest gains, you wire your brain to crave consistency and turn progress into an addiction. Psychologically, this works because the brain thrives on feedback. Each tiny improvement, a slightly faster mile, one extra page read, $1 saved, creates a hit of dopamine. That reward locks the habit in place, making you want to repeat it. Over time, the compounding effect turns what once felt insignificant into transformation. A 1% improvement daily doesn't feel like much, but over a year, it multiplies into exponential growth. The trick is not speed, it's accumulation. Emotionally, tracking small wins keeps hope alive when the big picture feels overwhelming. You might not have reached your dream body, your dream income, or your dream skill yet, but if you can look back and see that yesterday you were weaker, poorer, or less skilled than today, you feel powerful. That awareness breeds resilience because you know you're moving forward, however slowly. Progress, no matter how small, is fuel for the soul. Champions in every field, athletes, entrepreneurs, creators, obsess over micro improvements because they know the magic of compounding. Tiny steps, tracked and celebrated, are what separate the dreamers from the doers. The world worships big wins, but those who master small ones quietly become unstoppable. Use visual timelines. Using visual timelines is a mental trick that turns the abstract flow of time into something you can grasp, shape, and control. Most people live trapped in the fog of now, overwhelmed by tasks, deadlines, and long-term goals that feel distant and blurry. But when you lay your life, your projects, or your decisions onto a timeline, you can see everything changes. Time stops being an invisible current dragging you and becomes a map you can navigate. Psychologically, visual timelines rewire how the brain processes complexity. Human memory is terrible at juggling scattered tasks or distant goals, but it thrives on spatial visual order. A timeline takes chaos and imposes clarity. You can see what comes first, what depends on what, and where bottlenecks or opportunities lie. This reduces cognitive overload and replaces it with structure, freeing your mind to think strategically rather than reactively. Emotionally, timelines create urgency and hope at the same time. When you see deadlines approaching visually, procrastination feels harder to justify. Your brain feels the weight of time running out. But timelines also stretch your vision into the future, reminding you that today's effort plants tomorrow's results. A daunting 5-year goal suddenly looks achievable when broken into visible milestones. Fear shrinks and motivation grows. This is why great leaders, entrepreneurs, and creators use visual timelines relentlessly. They know clarity of time means clarity of action. While most drift aimlessly through the weeks and years, those who see their path laid out in front of them move with purpose. To use a timeline is to take command of time itself, turning the abstract into the actionable. Mentally remove constraints. Mentally removing constraints is the art of breaking chains that often exist only in your imagination. Most people see limits everywhere: rules, expectations, resources, time, and they shrink their thinking to fit inside those invisible walls. But when you strip those constraints away in your mind, even for a moment, you unleash creativity and possibilities that were impossible to see before. This is how breakthroughs are born, by daring to imagine a world without the cages you've accepted as unshakable truth. Psychologically, constraints narrow focus, which is useful for survival but deadly for innovation. Your brain instinctively adapts to boundaries, training itself not to consider what feels impossible. By mentally removing them, you activate dormant pathways in the brain, sparking ideas and strategies that bypass the normal rules. Asking, what would I do if money wasn't an issue, if time wasn't scarce, if failure didn't matter? Dismantles mental barriers and frees you to see answers that others can't. Emotionally, this exercise is electrifying. It replaces the suffocating weight of limitation with the rush of liberation. Suddenly, problems that felt impossible transform into puzzles waiting to be solved. This surge of possibility fuels motivation, courage, and boldness. You begin to question not just external limits, but internal ones, the doubts, fears, and excuses that have quietly ruled you. When you practice removing constraints, you realize how many of them were illusions to begin with. The people who reshape industries, movements, and even their own lives are rarely the ones who played within the rules. They were the ones who asked, what if the rules didn't exist? And then they acted as if they didn't. Test assumptions aloud. Testing assumptions aloud is the practice of dragging hidden beliefs into the open, where they can be examined, challenged, and either strengthened or destroyed. Most people carry silent assumptions that govern their choices. This won't work. They won't agree. I'm not capable. It's always been done this way. Left unspoken, these assumptions fester in the dark, shaping decisions without ever being questioned. But when you voice them out loud, something powerful happens. They either collapse under their own weakness or solidify into truths you can actually build upon. Psychologically, This works because the act of speaking transforms vague thoughts into tangible form. The brain often treats assumptions as fact simply because they were never tested, but when you say them aloud, you engage different neural circuits, forcing logic and coherence. Suddenly, what felt like an unquestionable truth, "I can't do this because it's too risky," sounds flimsy, even absurd when spoken. The moment the words leave your mouth, your mind begins dissecting them, and clarity replaces illusion. Emotionally, testing assumptions aloud disarms fear. Many of the beliefs that hold you back thrive only in silence, where they feel bigger than they really are. But when you give them voice, you shrink them. You either realize they were exaggerations, born of insecurity, or you discover they contain real weight, which then gives you the chance to address them directly instead of being haunted by them. In groups, this technique is even more powerful. Voicing assumptions sparks dialogue, reveals blind spots, and often uncovers insights that no one saw before. Where most remain trapped by unspoken limits, those who test assumptions aloud break through barriers and move with a freedom others never taste. Categorize by importance, not urgency. Categorizing by importance rather than urgency is a mental shift that separates the reactive from the powerful. Most people live trapped in the tyranny of the urgent. Emails, notifications, last-minute demands, fires that feel impossible to ignore. They confuse urgency with significance, spending their lives putting out sparks while the true priorities that could transform everything quietly burn out in the background. The person who learns to sort life by importance instead of urgency seizes control of time, energy, and destiny. Psychologically, urgency hijacks the brain. It triggers stress responses that scream, "Do this now," regardless of whether it truly matters. Importance, on the other hand, requires conscious thought, asking, "Will this matter tomorrow, next year, in 10 years? By filtering tasks through that lens, you reprogram your brain to resist the false high of urgency and to lock onto what builds lasting results. The world trains you to react. Discipline trains you to prioritize. Emotionally, this discipline feels like liberation. No longer are you enslaved to constant demands that drain you but lead nowhere. Instead, you feel alignment. Your actions match your vision, and each day carries weight. Relationships deepen when they stop being fit in later. Dreams become real when they stop being endlessly postponed. Stress gives way to focus because you are no longer scattering your energy across meaningless fires. You are feeding the flames that actually matter. The difference between the average and the extraordinary isn't effort, it's focus. Those who chase urgency become exhausted and empty. Those who serve importance build legacies. The question is never, "What needs me now?" It's what deserves me most. Think like a beginner. To think like a beginner is to reclaim the sharpness and curiosity that most people lose as they grow older and more experienced. Knowledge can be a gift, but it can also be a prison. Once you believe you already know how something works, your mind stops questioning, stops exploring, and stops seeing possibilities. Beginners, on the other hand, are free. They ask naive questions, spot obvious truths experts overlook, and explore without the weight of assumptions. When you learn to think like a beginner, you rediscover that freedom. Psychologically, this mindset disrupts cognitive bias. Experts are often blinded by their own expertise. They filter information through years of assumptions, dismissing ideas that don't fit their framework. Beginners don't carry that burden. Their minds are open, fresh, willing to entertain possibilities without judgment. By deliberately adopting that perspective, you give your brain permission to escape its ruts and reimagine what's possible. Emotionally, thinking like a beginner reignites wonder. The world feels richer when you stop assuming you've seen it all. That sense of discovery energizes you, pulling you out of cynicism and boredom. When you ask simple questions like, "Why is it done this way?" or What if we tried the opposite? You spark innovation and connection because curiosity is contagious. People are drawn to those who still marvel at the obvious. This is why breakthrough ideas often come not from experts, but outsiders. They are not burdened by the belief that this is how it's always been done. To think like a beginner is to break free from the arrogance of certainty and return to the fertile soil of curiosity, where all growth begins. Isolate variables. Isolating variables is the discipline of breaking chaos into pieces, of stripping away the noise until only the true cause remains. Most people drown in complexity. They see a mess of factors, influences, and emotions all tangled together, and they can't tell what's actually driving the outcome. But when you train yourself to isolate one variable at a time, you turn confusion into clarity. You stop guessing and start knowing. Psychologically, this trick protects you from false conclusions. The human brain loves patterns, but it often invents them where none exist. If you fail at something, your instinct might be to blame everything at once: your skill, your tools, your environment, your luck. But by isolating variables, you can test them one by one. Was it really your ability, or was it the method? Was it the method or the timing? Slowly, the fog lifts, and truth stands alone. Neurologically, isolating variables sharpens critical thinking. It forces your brain to shift from emotional reasoning to structured analysis. Scientists use it in experiments. Athletes use it in training. Strategists use it in decision-making, all for the same reason. It exposes the signal hiding inside the noise. Emotionally, this practice brings calm. Instead of feeling crushed by the weight of 1,000 what-ifs, you dissect the problem piece by piece, reducing fear and overwhelm. It gives you control because once you've found the true driver, you can act on it directly. Most people swing wildly at every shadow, wasting effort on distractions. But the one who isolates variables strikes at the root. They solve problems faster, make smarter choices, and wield clarity like a blade in a world lost in confusion. Watch for unintended consequences. Watching for unintended consequences is the discipline of looking beyond the immediate payoff and asking, what else will this set in motion? Most people judge decisions by their first-order effects, the obvious, short-term results they can see. They celebrate a quick win, a fast fix, or an easy solution, never realizing that beneath the surface, ripples are spreading that may come back to haunt them. The sharp mind knows that every action creates echoes, and those echoes can be far more powerful than the initial impact. Psychologically, this practice pulls you out of linear thinking and forces you into systems thinking. The brain naturally craves simplicity: cause, effect, done. But reality doesn't work that way. When you raise prices, sales might rise in the short term, but loyalty may erode. When you punish a child harshly, obedience may come immediately, but rebellion may grow silently. Every decision is a chain reaction, and those who only see the first link are blind to the trap that waits 2 steps later. Emotionally, this awareness can feel heavy, even unsettling, because it demands responsibility. It means you can no longer hide behind "I didn't know" or "I didn't mean to." But it also gives you power, because by anticipating the fallout, you protect yourself from regret and build foresight others lack. It turns impulsive action into strategic calculation. History is full of leaders and innovators undone by unintended consequences, blinded by their own short-term vision. But those who make it to the top and stay there are the ones who train themselves to look deeper, to think longer, to ask not just what happens now, but what happens after that. That simple vigilance makes the difference between collapse and legacy. Use counterfactuals. Using counterfactuals is the art of bending reality in your mind to extract truths that the present alone hides. A counterfactual is a "what if it had been different" scenario. an exploration of alternate outcomes that never happened but reveal hidden forces shaping the ones that did. Most people take reality at face value, but the sharpest thinkers ask, what if I had chosen differently? What if this variable were removed? What if the opposite had occurred? This mental play doesn't change the past, but it illuminates the unseen mechanics of cause and effect. Psychologically, counterfactuals sharpen causal reasoning. The brain loves stories. It assumes things happen because they had to, but life is rarely inevitable. By imagining different paths, you break the illusion of certainty and discover the true levers of reality. A business didn't succeed simply because it was meant to. Maybe it hinged on one lucky hire, one well-timed decision, one competitor's mistake. When you ask what might have happened otherwise, the fragile and powerful elements stand out. Emotionally, counterfactuals spark both humility and power. They humble you by showing how easily things could have gone another way, reminding you not to take success for granted. But they also empower you, because once you identify the levers that change outcomes, you realize you can control them in the future. If doing X led here, then doing Y could lead somewhere entirely different next time. Failure becomes less of a curse and more of a map, with alternate paths glowing faintly in the dark. The few who use counterfactuals see not just what is, but what might have been, and in that space of imagined realities, they discover strategies invisible to everyone else. Ask, is this reversible? Asking, is this reversible, is a mental filter that slices away fear and hesitation while sharpening decision-making. Most people paralyze themselves over choices because they treat every decision as permanent, as if one wrong move will trap them forever. But the truth is, most decisions in life are reversible. They can be undone, adjusted, or redirected. The moment you ask this question, the weight lifts. You stop treating small forks in the road like life or death moments and start moving forward with speed and confidence. Psychologically, this question calms the brain's risk response. Fear of permanence triggers overthinking, but reframing a choice as temporary tricks the mind into taking action. If a mistake can be reversed, the danger shrinks, and suddenly the fear loses its grip. You begin to experiment more, test more, and learn faster because you no longer waste energy obsessing over perfect outcomes. Emotionally, asking, is this reversible, is liberating. It allows you to step into opportunities without the crushing anxiety of, what if I choose wrong? You stop clinging to safety and start embracing movement. And often, you discover that the act of moving, even in the wrong direction, teaches you far more than standing still. Reversibility becomes your permission slip to try, fail, and adapt without shame. This is why entrepreneurs, innovators, and leaders thrive on this mindset. They separate high-stakes, irreversible decisions from the countless reversible ones, and they act quickly on the latter. While others hesitate endlessly, they adapt in real time. The simple act of asking this question unlocks speed, courage, and resilience in a world where most remain stuck, frozen by imaginary permanence. Treat opinions as hypotheses. Treating opinions as hypotheses is the mindset shift that transforms rigid thinking into unstoppable growth. Most people treat their opinions as sacred truths, defending them with emotion, ego, and stubbornness. But the sharper mind sees opinions for what they really are, temporary guesses, assumptions waiting to be tested. By treating them as hypotheses, you give yourself the freedom to explore, refine, and even abandon them when evidence demands it. This single shift takes you from being a prisoner of your beliefs to being a scientist of your own mind. Psychologically, this trick dismantles ego. When you see your opinions as experiments instead of final verdicts, you no longer need to be right. Instead, you crave truth. This rewires your brain away from confirmation bias and toward curiosity. You stop filtering the world to protect your pride, and instead, you open yourself to evidence, even if it hurts. That humility is rare, and it's what keeps people evolving when others stagnate. Emotionally, it's liberating. Opinions often feel heavy, like armor you have to defend, but hypotheses are light. They can be challenged, questioned, and reshaped without crushing your sense of identity. If you're wrong, it's not failure, it's progress. You've just eliminated a false path, bringing you closer to reality. When you treat opinions as hypotheses, you become flexible where others are brittle. You bend with new information instead of breaking against it. You think more clearly, speak more carefully, and adapt more quickly. While most waste their lives defending outdated beliefs, you stay in motion, always testing, always learning, always evolving. And that adaptability is intelligence in its purest form.